I have to go now. My planet needs me.
Yeah, it's gonna be one of those games. Hey everyone, I just played Men in Black for the PlayStation 1, and it is the worst game I have ever played. That's not an exaggeration, that's not hyperbole to get views, that is my genuine, honest opinion. I hate this game. It is torture to play. The only way I saw it through to the end was with the help of a friend. Having him sitting there beside me sharing in the misery, taking turns playing through each and every agonizing moment of gameplay, was a real help. But another reason was simple spite. I took this game as a challenge, and I refused to let it get the better of me long after my friend wanted to move on to something else. It took us months. It felt like years. I genuinely wanted to snap the disc when it was over, but I didn't because, well, it wasn't my disc, it was my friend's. In lieu of that, I vowed never to play it again. So anyway, here's my critique of Men in Black for the PlayStation 1. Why am I like this? And I know what some of you are surely thinking. A bad tie-in video game? Monotom, have you noticed the sky is blue yet? And yeah, I'm no stranger to bad tie-in games either. The Jurassic Park retrospective is proof enough of that. But Men in Black is different. Men in Black truly is one of a kind in its awfulness, and I need to talk about it. I need to get this out of my head so I can move on with my life.
Also heads up, I've tried to edit around them as best as I can, but there are some flashing lights in this video, so whenever you see this red exclamation mark in the top right, consider it a 10-second warning before the flashing starts. The timestamp underneath will take you past the danger zone.
Okay, thanks, bye.
But before I get my hands into the guts of this game, we need to talk about Men in Black the movie. I rewatched it for the first time in about 20 years for the sake of this critique, and I was surprised to discover how much it still slaps. The first act had me hooked with some great comedic moments, and while I do think it started to degrade in the later thirds of the movie, it remained a fun time. Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones are extremely charismatic as the leads J and K, but Vincent D'Onofrio steals the show with his truly inspired portrayal of the villainous cockroach wearing an Edgar suit. Not all of the effects have aged well, and like I said, it kind of collapses under its own weight as it goes on. There are a few things that definitely wouldn't fly today, like tabloid garbage being secretly true, but otherwise it has a timeless feeling to it. A classic in every sense of the word. I was humming Men in Black by Will Smith for days after watching the movie. It is such a catchy tune, and it captures the spirit of the movie exactly. Here's a YouTube-friendly sample. The movie knows when to be silly, it knows when to be serious, and it revels in how weird it is rather than half-heartedly shying away from its true self. It is a celebration of 20th century extraterrestrial Americana, despite taking place almost entirely in New York City. So coming from that, what kind of game do you think Gigawatt Studios decided to make? Well, you already know because you've been watching footage of it this entire time, unless you haven't actually looked at the screen yet, in which case, hang on for another moment. Look, this bit read better when it was in the script. You'd think maybe a 3D platformer like the then recently released, genre-defining Super Mario 64. Maybe a light-hearted first-person shooter in the vein of Duke Nukem, with a little less edge. Maybe even an adventure game, though the heyday of the genre's classics had since passed. I'd be surprised if these options weren't at least considered by the developers, but none were the road they decided to walk. The new hotness in 1996 was the original Resident Evil and the original Tomb Raider, and those are the games the developers of Men in Black decided to copy. Men in Black is a survival horror game to the bone, a Resident Evil clone in all the wrong ways, but it's also an adventure game with completely unforgiving precision platforming, just like Tomb Raider. Needless to say, this blend of genres did not mix well. As a long-time fan of the Resident Evil games, especially the classics, playing Men in Black felt like playing a piece of music in the wrong key. It feels so close to being right. There's just something off about it, and I think it's the undercurrent of Tomb Raider's influence that is giving off that vibe. As someone who had never played a Resident Evil game before, this is the first experience my friend ever had with the classic fixed camera tank control survival horror formula, and knowing that now, I'm not surprised at all that the Resident Evil games didn't click for him when we started going through them back in 2018. That's actually the reason we ended up playing this game together at all. Us playing the early Resident Evil games sent him back to Men in Black, which he then brought to me with a nudge like, hey, check this shit out. Never one to turn down the chance to play an off-brand survival horror game, I took him up on it. After all, how bad could it be? Oh, Oh no. This opening mission sets the tone for the rest of the game. Every horrible aspect of the game design, every half-baked mechanic, and infuriating quirk of the level layout is on full display here, with the sole exception of inventory puzzles, and it all starts with this hallway. And just look at it. The backgrounds, the character model, the sound design. This game has very little music, most of it is crunchy ambient noise, and it does nothing to set the tone. This is meant to be adapting Will Smith's introduction from the film, where he chases down an alien disguised as a human. That's still what you're doing here, but all the vitality from that scene is gone. The sounds of the city are distant. There's no music to get your pulse racing. There's no trail to follow, no indication of which door you're meant to pick. There's no energy, there's no atmosphere, it's just an empty hallway. Just listen to it for a moment.
Doggy, big mean doggy.
It feels like the game is already bored with itself. Things do not improve once you leave the hallway of existential dread. The mission takes you through an apartment, a handful of New York alleyways, and then across a couple of rooftops, but the energy remains tepid throughout. Even when you're leaping across rooftops or shooting armed goons, or defusing a bomb, it's just so flaccid of an experience. You get glimpses of the alien you're chasing ducking through windows and running down fire escapes, accompanied by musical stings, but they're only fleeting moments. Then it's back to New York ambience and kicking. Lots and lots of kicking. It is a horrible opening level, but it is a fantastic first impression because it tells you exactly what kind of experience you're in for. It feels like it's meant to be a tutorial level in a lot of ways, but I would hesitate to call it that because it doesn't actually tutorialize anything. Where are you meant to go? What are you meant to do? How are you meant to do it? The game never tells you and will never tell you. It just throws you in the deep end and expects you to swim. About the only thing it actually does teach you is how low a level it's willing to sink to in terms of its difficulty. Take that bomb, for example. It just starts beeping at you as soon as you enter the room. Ignore it or try to leave the apartment, and it's a guaranteed game over. The only way to deal with it is to defuse it, and this is the screen it gives you to do so. There's no obvious switch, just a light spinning in a circle that you can't interact with. My question for you is this: what are you meant to do here? If your answer is interact with the wires, congratulations! You just exploded and no longer have to play this game. If your answer is interact with the wires in time with the beeping, my condolences. You've defused the bomb and must continue playing. To play devil's advocate, the spinning light is also timed to the beeping, but it's still just an indistinct spiral pattern. Any part of it could have been used as the solution to the puzzle. Worse, if you fail, it's an instant game over, and it's only 10 seconds into the opening mission. You might think that's a good thing given it will only take another 10 seconds to get back, but it sets a dangerous precedent regarding this game's usage of trial and error. A precedent it maintains directly into the next room. When you first enter the apartment from the hallway of existential dread, the room is empty. There are a couple of shelves and displays you can interact with, though nothing you can pick up. Return to this room after defusing the bomb, and suddenly there's an enemy. This is something you will always have to be watching out for because it is a tactic that the game beats into the dirt. If you make any kind of progress, you always have to be on the lookout for new enemies spawning around places you've already visited. Sometimes it makes sense, but other times moving from one side of a room to the other will cause enemies to pop out and rush you down, even if you could see where they supposedly came from in the previous screen. It's a cheap trick, and the only other one the game has is throwing you into an unfair situation and hoping you fumble the controls long enough to require a restart. Take the moment you exit the apartment. The second you set foot on the fire escape, you're set upon by a pair of goons with machine guns who can and will shoot you from below, but you yourself have no way to retaliate against. Your only option is to rush down the fire escape and jump the rest of the way to street level, so that the game's janky combat system will actually allow you to target them. The developers even put in this trap of a health pack on the landing in order to make you stop and take damage, more damage than the health pack itself can actually recover if you're unlucky enough. It doesn't get much better once you reach the rooftops either. The building where you're ambushed by 2 gunmen is bad enough, but the one before that is much worse in my opinion. There's only one goon with a gun, but as a result his friend will make a beeline for you the second the screen loads in. You have maybe 5 seconds to take out the gunman with whatever ammo you have left before Punchlord reaches you and basically ends your run. After so many attempts at this level, this section is mostly muscle memory to me, but it wasn't always that way. When I first played Men in Black with my friend, we got stuck at these 2 screens for what felt like hours. I have the exact patterns and positioning for these screens burned into my brain from the afternoon we spent suffering through this section of the game, but back then it was absolute chaos, and the combat wasn't even the part we kept dying on. My friend had experience on his side, and I got the hang of the controls pretty quickly, but the part that had us stumped was the jumping. I just could not make these jumps. No matter how I positioned myself, no matter what direction I turned Will Smith to face, I spent that afternoon plummeting off these 2 buildings to my death. Now there was tension, now there were stakes, because neither of us wanted to spend another 3 minutes kicking goons to death just for another 5-second attempt at a jump both of us knew I would fail. Then we got impatient and started dying on the combat sections too, which just made things even worse. It got to the point where we were just delirious with laughter, screaming please at the screen each time the game decided I missed the jump. I wish I had been able to record it because it was just 2 guys going insane trying to make crunchy Will Smith jump this tiny gap. The only upside was that when it came time to make this video, the muscle memory was all still there. I got through it easily enough this time, go figure. The mission ends with a boss fight against an alien in a suit, and woo! Look at that health bar. I don't think even if you saved every bullet you can find in this mission for this fight, it would be enough to take this guy down. He is just too tanky against firearms. 30 pistol bullets is only enough to get him down by a third, which is just insane. Your only viable option is to fall back on hand-to-hand combat, which is certainly not without its own issues. But defeat him and the level ends, with as much vitality and verve as the way it opened.
And who the hell are you supposed to be?
A friend.
When you regain control, you're a certified, bona fide member of the Men in Black. Now, at last, the game can begin. Fuck this, I'm leaving. I think it's interesting to talk about Men in Black in relation to its 2 main influences, Resident Evil and Tomb Raider, but I wanted to speak about the opening mission on its own without reference to these other games, just to give you an idea of what kind of experience it is in a vacuum. From now on I'm going to be talking about Men in Black in comparison to Resident Evil and Tomb Raider, because it is honestly spectacular how poorly it implements elements from both games. There's a great quote from Roger Ebert's review of Battlefield Earth, regarding its overuse of Dutch angles that pretty much sums up Men in Black's approach to game design. Quote, "The director Roger Christian has learned from better films that directors sometimes tilt their cameras, but he has not learned why." End quote. On that note, let's talk about tutorials. Tomb Raider's tutorial level might well be one of the most famous examples of the medium. It is an optional self-contained level set in Lara Croft's mansion, where the player is free to familiarise themselves and experiment with the controls. There's no danger of death, you're given as many tries and as much time as you need to complete each section of Lara's obstacle course to your satisfaction. Tomb Raider is a game that demands mastery of its controls in order to complete, but it's not cruel in that demand. At least not here. The player can skip Croft Manor entirely if they feel confident in their abilities, or simply don't want to play through it. But clearly a lot of people did, because it's one of the most recognisable aspects of the entire franchise, and it's easy to see why. Despite the fact it was made over a single weekend, a lot of love clearly went into crafting an environment that wasn't just a generic obstacle course, and it makes sense given Lara's lifestyle that she would convert part of her stuffy old country mansion into into a place to train for her adventures. I played Tomb Raider all the way through for the first time while making this video, and in case it's not obvious from my tone of voice, I loved it. I enjoyed it so much I actually want to do a video on it. But as a relatively first time player, Croft Manor was exactly what I needed in terms of a tutorial. It is exemplary in its execution. Men in Black's tutorial level is an empty void. I feel like I can just end this section of the video here. Nothing more needs to be said. I didn't actually know this part of the game existed. My friend and I never played it during our original run-through back in 2019, and I don't think it would have helped if we'd done so. For one thing, you can't even access it until you've completed the opening mission, which just totally defeats the point of a tutorial. It's still optional like Croft Manor. It's not required that you complete the shooting gallery to finish the game, but it's no longer self-contained. Whatever help it might provide in mastering the controls is completely lost, because by the time you reach it, the game will have already beaten its mechanics into you through trial and error. And you know what? Thank fuck it is optional, because it's a tutorial level that you can fail very easily. In the same way the opening mission was a flaccid adaptation of the New York chase from the movie, the tutorial is a flaccid adaptation of Agent J's training, specifically the shooting gallery. The first 4 screens of the tutorial are just a series of increasingly difficult shooting galleries, but there's none of the personality of the scene it's trying to evoke. In fact, being familiar with the film will actually make it harder. Agent J is made a Men in Black agent precisely because he shoots the one innocuous looking target in the gallery in amongst all the big scary threatening aliens. But if you follow that logic here, you'll fail. You're meant to shoot the targets wielding weapons and ignore the ones that aren't, and even that can be difficult with some of them. You're given infinite ammo and can use any gun you want, but access to the full arsenal and all the ammo you can spend won't make the carcinogenic aiming system any less janky. But I'll save the full discussion on combat for a later section of the video because there's just so much to unpack here. To start with, each of the shooting galleries are all considered part of the same level. If you succeed at the first, but fail at the second or third or fourth, you can't just restart from where you stuffed up. The game treats it as a death and boots you back to the hub level starting position. Any sort of failure here will result in the same, so if you get all the way to the 4th shooting gallery, hell, if you make it all the way to the boxing match at the final screen, and then fail, you have no choice but to start the whole thing from the beginning. And there's just no point! You don't get extra ammo or unlock an extra gun, you don't get a different cutscene, the victory cinematic is almost exactly the same as the failure cinematic. Its function is just to familiarize the player with the controls, no different from Croft Manor, but it fundamentally does not understand how to do that. It's full of the same trial and error first time player traps that the rest of the game relies so heavily upon, and on top of that, never actually explains how to do any of the things it's allegedly trying to teach you. Take the shooting galleries. They are inherently simple games with fundamentally basic mechanics. They are by nature very pick up and play, and yet somehow Men in Black manages to make them needlessly complicated. The goal is still to shoot enough enemy targets while avoiding a certain number of friendly targets, but the enemy targets are labelled bad, and the friendly targets are labelled good. It's so needlessly obtuse. I had to take a few shots at every target out of curiosity before it finally clicked for me what the game actually wanted me to do, and even then I still wasn't sure I was doing the right thing until I progressed to the next section of the gallery. They're hard bastards too. The first one is simple enough, but the other sections of the shooting gallery demand perfect runs. You cannot miss a single good-bad target any more than you can afford to shoot a single bad-good target, and it is needlessly frustrating for what's meant to be a fucking tutorial. Cuphead might hold the title for the most difficult tutorial in all of gaming, but this has to be a close second. I just save-scummed my way through it after the first few failures. I did not have the patience to go through each section again for every single attempt, because after you finish with the shooting galleries, you're met with this. And if you're thinking, Monotom, that looks like a jumping puzzle in a game with fixed camera angles. It is. Good luck. Don't fall or you'll have to do all 4 shooting galleries again. Like with the combat, I'm going to save my thoughts on the platforming for a later section of the video. But while we're here, I can't not mention this absolute debate of a platform. You cannot reach the end of the area from it even though it makes you think it's where you have to go. It is just a big middle finger to the player pointing back to the shooting galleries. I love how spiteful it is. Past the OSS office from Spy Kids 2 is the final area of the tutorial. Another fistfight with the same sort of alien the player fought at the end of the New York level, and it is just as tedious this time too. Win or lose, you're booted back to the hub level with literally nothing to show for it but wasted time. The shooting gallery may be one of the worst tutorial levels I've ever encountered. It doesn't serve its purpose, it's needlessly difficult, it is awful to look at, and there's no reason to complete it. No wonder my friend never bothered to tell me it even existed back when we played the game together. Men in Black was enough of a struggle without it. It just feels like the game was trying to have its cake and eat it too by throwing the player into the action like Resident Evil does, while also including an optional tutorial like Tomb Raider does. And it just doesn't work. Mainly because while Resident Evil might appear to drop the player right into the action, there is a brief introductory section that, much like Croft Manor, is one of the most iconic moments in gaming history. Resident Evil doesn't throw hordes of its most powerful enemies at the player within moments of pressing New Game. The player is funneled into a room with a single slow-moving zombie that they are not even required to defeat in order to progress. Running away is a perfectly viable option, and if playing as Jill Valentine is actually the smarter play, given Barry will blow its head off when the zombie uncharacteristically follows the player back into the dining room. It's only after this point that the game starts introducing faster and stronger enemies, and while it may not strictly fit the criteria of a tutorial, it does at least present the player with a low-stress opening encounter from a purely mechanical standpoint anyway. At least the hub level does a better job of adapting the MIB HQ from the film than the tutorial level did the shooting gallery scene, but there's nothing to it beyond its looks. It's just so big and empty. There's none of the bustle and vitality that the place has in the film, and the lack of music saps even more personality out of it. There are things to interact with, Zed's office, the armory, the shooting gallery, and the level exit, but they never change. They are all available from the second you arrive, and aside from the different briefings Zed gives, are exactly the same at the start of the game as they are at the end. You don't unlock extra guns by progressing through the game or finding them around the various levels. The armory will always be fully stocked, and whatever extras you do stumble across always vanish from your inventory as soon as you return to MIB HQ. There's no one around to interact with, you can't go around chatting with Agent L or K or J, you can't even get downstairs to mingle with the 2 other MIB agents that are present. You just have to watch them forlornly from above while they go about their very slow walk cycles. It's just so lifeless. There's no reason to hang around and explore. Well, there is one. And for some silly reason, it made my friend and I howl with laughter every time we did it. But maybe that was just because our brains were cooked from playing the game for so long. The only fun we had with this hub level was walking each of the player characters up to the camera in this corner of the room, very, very slowly, because it takes a very, very long time, and when you finally reach the end, you are rewarded with an image that looks like it should be part of some kind of shitpost. It is such an awkward camera angle. I cannot help but laugh at it every time I see it. It was even used as one of the promotional images in a magazine, which is just marketing genius. And since we're on the topic, let's talk about the backgrounds. If I can say anything good about this game, it is that the pre-rendered backgrounds look great. They are easily the best part of the game, and the marketing department clearly knew that too, because what few articles and what little advertising I could find dedicated to hyping up Men in Black invariably boast of its 200 unique pre-rendered backgrounds, which is really grasping at straws in terms of marketable material, and it's not even true either. I went and counted them all, and the most I could find was 148. Even adding in all the full-page documents and puzzles only brings the count up to 187. The only way to bump the number past 200 is to count all the duplicates like open doors and spinning lights that don't even fit together seamlessly anyway. Can't believe gaming magazines would just lie to people like that. Anyway, yes, the backgrounds are good. They are well made. Their artists were the MVPs of this dev team, which is why it pains me so much to say that so many of them are terribly integrated into the game. There is an art to the positioning of fixed camera angles in survival horror games. One that, even as a fan of the style, I don't think I truly appreciated until I experienced a bad example. There are a few to choose from, both classic and current day, and Men in Black is one of the worst. My friend dislikes them because they remind him of security camera footage, and on the whole, I disagree with him on that point. Men in Black certainly has a lot of backgrounds that give the impression you're playing from the perspective of some distant security camera, but when done right, fixed camera angles just don't have that effect. They evoke the cinematography of films like the original Ring. The positioning of every angle in relation to every other angle is based entirely on atmosphere and artistic style. Security cameras, due to their function, are often positioned in order to cover as much area as possible, whereas a good fixed camera angle in a horror game is usually attempting to do the opposite. They are meant to be claustrophobic. They are meant to obfuscate large parts of the area, to give the impression that the walls around the player are as much an enemy as the things wandering between them. In Resident Evil, it's rare that you'll encounter a room with only one camera angle, even ones that are and always will be safe for the player to inhabit, like save rooms. Going into new areas for the first time, and even returning to old areas after making progress, ratchets up the tension because you can never be sure what's waiting for you around the next corner. Unfamiliar players are forced to be cautious, or rely on sound to determine if there is any danger, or if the room is empty. That Resident Evil has fantastic sound design really helps add to the tension. You may know something is in the room with you, but you may not know where, which is in some ways even worse. This claustrophobic approach to the camera angles also has the added benefit of making the few moments of spectacle, when they do pull back to reveal large open areas, much more memorable. To say nothing of how well they all lead into each other. It's seamless. It never feels like there's a moment where the player can escape their view, the way someone in real life might escape the range of a security camera. The original Resident Evil was conceptualized as a first-person shooter before switching over to a fixed camera perspective, and thank God they decided to make the change. The classic Resident Evil games just would not be as memorable as they are without their use of fixed camera angles and gorgeous pre-rendered backgrounds. They hold up today in a way they wouldn't if the game had gone with the chunky, blocky, three-dimensional environments possible at the time. The style works extremely well for the kind of game the developers were trying to make, in the same way a third-person 3D environment worked extremely well for Tomb Raider. Of course, it helps that the environments into which Resident Evil is placing its cameras are very carefully constructed. Almost the entire game is set indoors, and in the few moments where the player is permitted to venture outside, they are confined to courtyards with high walls, or fenced-in gardens, or narrow walkways. Exits are always clearly marked and clearly visible compared to walls, and there are very few doors that cannot at some point be unlocked across one playthrough or another. Interactive parts of the background or important items scream off the screen with their shape or size or focus. The game makes it very hard to miss things if you're paying attention. This is also pretty true of Tomb Raider. Keys and important items and switches and locks all stand out from their respective sprawling environments, as do big set-piece traps. The amount of consideration and care these aspects of level design require is self-evident, but also pretty invisible when done well. Do I even have to say it? Men in Black's pre-rendered backgrounds might be nice to look at, but they are not nice to play in. So many of them are placed so far from the player that it makes engaging in combat, jumping, or interacting with the environment needlessly frustrating. Others are slapped down with no consideration to atmosphere or tone. They give you full view of the environment you're passing through, and in doing so offer the game no opportunity to build suspense and tension. You can't hide an enemy in a corner you've already already seen, or at least you shouldn't. It's not like Resident Evil where every enemy in a room spawns in the moment the player enters, and won't spawn more until the player re-enters the room after progress. Because Men in Black lacks the oft-maligned door transitions, it has no real way to mark where one area ends and another begins, so instead uses individual camera angles as spawn triggers for certain enemies. Enemies will pop in and out of existence depending on which camera angle you're viewing a given area from, and only very occasionally will they persist between screen transitions. As the game goes on, enemies give up all pretense of running in from off-screen and just start phasing up through the floor. It completely defeats the point of using a fixed camera angle system, and that's just in regard to the game's enemies. Items are usually big, chunky 3D models, so I have no problem with their placement around the game environments. They're pretty hard to miss. What isn't are the interactive parts of the environments, be they objects containing items, or doors, or notes explaining how to solve upcoming puzzles. Resident Evil always put obvious indicators around interactive aspects of its backgrounds, either lights or 3D objects, or distinct things that draw the eye. To contrast, what part of the environment are you meant to interact with here? Even when there are only 2 or 3 things you could possibly interact with on screen, they usually stand out so poorly that it's hard to tell if anything is actually important, or if it's just part of the background. At the opposite end of that spectrum, there are some backgrounds with so much visual clutter that finding the important part turns into a pixel hunt. It doesn't help that so many of them are so dark either. The Spencer Mansion's bright colours might seem at odds with the horror atmosphere Resident Evil is trying to create, but at least you can always see where you are and what you're doing. The same is not true of Men in Black. It's just a nightmare of game design, and I kind of feel Tomb Raider's influence is to blame. Tomb Raider is a third-person adventure game, with a very PlayStation 1 era draw distance that occasionally leaves its massive open spaces hidden in darkness. The game actually uses its draw distance to great effect at some points, such as when the Sphinx looms out of the darkness in one of the Egyptian levels. The first time I saw that, it gave me chills. But just as often, the levels are constructed well enough to fit a massive space within the limits of the game's draw distance, preserving a sense of massive scale that Tomb Raider revels in. It is a large game, large in every sense. It wants to present the player with spectacle after spectacle. Even at their most restrictive, the levels are huge, and that sort of design ethic just does not fit onto a game with fixed camera angles. The kind of suspense and tension built by Tomb Raider is completely different to that of Resident Evil's, much less based on what could be lurking around any given corner, although there is an element of that, than on the kind of gut-twisting nerves that come with watching someone walk on a high-wire tightrope. It feels at times like that's the sort of tension Men in Black is trying to build, and the attempt at blending both styles leaves you with whatever this is. I commented earlier about how odd it is that they decided to make a Men in Black game in this style, but believe it or not, there was actually a reason behind it, and that reason was Will Smith. In an interview with The Next Generation magazine, David Koenig, one of the game's lead designers, states, quote, "We easily could have created a first-person shooter, but why do that? We have recognizable characters that would work much better in a third-person game," end quote. And yeah, if you have access to Will Smith's face, why wouldn't you use it? Especially back in the 1990s. But that still doesn't explain the fixed camera angles. What does is graphical fidelity. Creating a fully three-dimensional environment takes processing power and means you have to share resources between both it and the character models. Making the camera angles fixed means you can put more power into the character models and animations without having to worry about something like draw distance or keeping tabs on things just off screen. Aside from atmosphere, this is the reason why Resident Evil made the switch from a first-person shooter to a fixed third-person perspective. Wanting to present a perfectly sculpted three-dimensional facsimile of Tommy Lee Jones is a slightly less noble reason to pursue that style of game design, but hey, at least the developers were honest about it. And to their credit, the models don't look too bad. I should know, I spent hours on this screen. Eventually walking each agent very slowly up to the camera in this corner of the MIB headquarters will lose its luster, and there's barely anything else to do around here, so I guess that means we finally have to talk about the rest of the game. Fuck. So, welcome to level 1. This is different. Probably not what you were expecting, huh? Whatever pretense the game had about adapting Men in Black the film vanishes between loading screens. From here on out, aside from the occasional return to MIB-HQ, this game is horror in setup and tone right down to the bone. And needless to say, it is jarring to walk out of Men in Black right into John Carpenter's The Thing. I'm not even joking. They don't even bother to hide the influence of that movie on this level. There's a rundown outpost in the middle of the snow, a mysterious alien infection is spreading through the survivors that is causing them all to turn on one another, the sled dogs are going crazy, there's even a massive flying saucer buried in the ice, and it plays all of this deathly serious.
I've got to have a talk with Zed. I'm getting too old for these ice jobs.
Yes, the agents make the odd quip or two, but there is none of the levity featured in the Men in Black movie here. This level is bleak. The notes you find scattered around the base tell of a group torn apart by paranoia and fear. The few survivors you do encounter are mad and violent, and the place is covered with traps. There was an element of this kind of thing in Resident Evil, such as with the infamous Itchy Tasty document, but overall the tone of that game was B-movie camp. This is closer in tone to Tomb Raider, especially if you play that game on PC without music. But even that played more like a comic book than a self-serious cosmic horror story. But whatever lens through which you view it, it does not look like Men in Black. At least not Men in Black the film. I'd be curious to know how many people have even heard of the original Men in Black comics, much less read them. Written by Lowell Cunningham and illustrated by Sandy Carruthers, Men in Black had 2 3-issue limited runs in 1990 and 1991, and reading through them explained a lot about this game. Like, a lot. This was the final missing piece of the puzzle. After I finished the 6th and final issue, everything tonally discordant about Men in Black the game suddenly made sense. I can't know for certain if the comics were a genuine influence on the game more than the film. Only one article in CD Magazine mentioned the possibility that the developers had been interested in a Men in Black game based on the original comics, but I also can't imagine that they weren't. The comics are episodic, just like the game. The 2 runs were 3 issues each, just like the game. Each issue takes place in a different location around the United States, which the game expanded to include both American continents. Each issue deals with a single threat, but there are elements of an ongoing story. For example, the events of issue 2, where Agent J breaks protocol by peacefully sending a bunch of bug aliens home, lead directly into issue 6, where he faces the interplanetary legal ramifications of his actions at the hands of Doran the Cyborg. And that pretty well matches how each of the game's levels are technically self-contained, but all contribute to the overarching plot playing out in the background. But by far the strongest connective tissue between the comics and the game is the tone. The comics are bleak, not to say they aren't funny. There are a bunch of great comedic moments, some of which went right into the film practically unchanged. Pretty much everything with Doran in the final issue was hilarious, but the overall atmosphere is dangerously serious. If the movie adaptation is a celebration of extraterrestrial 20th century Americana, the comic is probably better described as a critical reflection of 20th century American folklore. It's not afraid to go to dark and violent places. It doesn't just deal with alien invasion, only 2 out of the 6 issues do. The first issue deals with a rural cult peddling drugs in the middle of nowhere. Another issue concerns the satanic panic surrounding tabletop games, like Dungeons and Dragons, where a group of kids accidentally summon a demon. Hey Carruthers, you can draw a d20, right? Yeah, of course I can draw that thing you just said, Cunningham.
Ha ha ha, I'm free. Ha 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 ha.
What a great game! Other issues take a critical look at superheroes, at local legends, at fandom. Its episodic approach and slowly unfurling, ultimately unfinished myth arc bring to mind series like The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher, or The Laundry Files by Charles Stross, much more than Men in Black's own film adaptation. There are common elements like J and K and Z, the suits, the Ray-Bans, the neuralizers, and like I said, there are scenes in the movie adapted directly from the comic, along with a lot of great great humour. But the film portrays the Men in Black organization as unequivocally good. The comic is far more critical of their methods, if not their function, though an element of that did make it into the movie. I thought watching the film that Tommy Lee Jones's Agent K came off as a little abrasive, especially in his treatment of Agent J. Boy, was I in for a shock to learn his comic counterpart is an absolute monster who is portrayed at best as a necessary evil, and at worst as a kill-crazy psychopath. He is constantly putting Jay in danger without fully explaining the situation, sometimes to use him as bait, sometimes just for a laugh. He is always prepared to shoot first and ask questions later. He is the closest thing the comics have to a main villain, and Jay is constantly calling him out on his bullshit. The movie perfectly cast Tommy Lee Jones in that role and improved the character a lot by making him into a much nobler, compassionate man, yet they didn't have to do anything to his charm. Comic K is funny, he's personable, he's witty, just as much as movie K is, and that's part of the reason why he comes off as such an effective antagonist. There's a memorable moment in the film where Agents K and J go to interview the wife of Edgar, whose skin has been stolen by a space cockroach, where he makes up codenames for them on the spot. That moment is taken almost entirely from the second issue of the comic, but instead of the codenames being a play on the actors' complexions, the one K gives J is North, the name of a colleague of Jay's who was murdered by the villains of the first issue, and he does it just because. At another point, he encourages a child to commit some sort of shooting, just because. But his darkest moment, and the comic's darkest moment overall, is when Kay decides it's not worth using a neuralizer on a mother who just saw her baby eaten by a demon, because, after all, who's going to believe her? The musk of toxic masculinity coming off the man is enough to curl your hair, made worse by the fact that often his chaotic neutral shoot first, cut the knot kind of problem solving is the best possible solution when the agents are faced with supernatural threats and have no time to find a less violent option. But he is not the hero, and the comic never pretends that he is. By the end of the comic, when faced with execution by an alien cyborg for refusing to shoot first and ask questions later in an earlier issue, Jay finally decides he's had enough of Kay's bullshit and drags him into Doran's beam, killing them both. And is that a motherfucking JoJo reference? Aside from the dark tone, the comic has some amazing panels that deserve to be reaction images because they're just so exploitable. For example, take Kay's complete non-reaction to a demon leaping out of nothing at him when you're just trying to live your life and someone's being toxic, or Jay's horrified scream when being teleported when you're 28 pages into a script and have barely talked about the game yet. So you've got the comic, which leans hard into straight-up horror, and you've got the film, which leans hard into family-friendly comedy, and finally the game, which tries and fails to juggle both. A spiritual adaptation of John Carpenter's The Thing just does not work when set in the same universe as the Men in Black movie. None of the game's free scenarios do, though the third one does come vaguely close to feeling like an issue of the comic. The game's just too dark and self-serious in tone to evoke the film, while also being too celebratory of the Men in Black organization and committed to vapid one-liners to evoke the comics. This is mostly speculation on my part, but it feels like the developers wanted to adapt the comic, realized they could make way more money selling a game with Will Smith on the box, and tried to combine the properties into one bizarre Frankenstein's monster Men in Black game, and it just doesn't work. Which is a shame, because the horror here is actually pretty effective. It might not be the best example of this kind of story, but the mystery of what happened to the people working the outpost is engaging, and the excellent backgrounds do a pretty good job of building a bleak and spooky mood. I wouldn't call it outright scary, but I've certainly played worse attempts at crafting a horror experience. It just sucks that the level is so boring. Wandering the radio base might be atmospheric, but there's very little to actually do. The place is tiny, and most of the rooms, at best, have a note to read or an item to pick up, and that's it. There are no enemies, no obvious paths forward. It's just you alone in the ice and snow. Even the few glimpses the player does get of dogs and aliens running through the blizzard are ruined by virtue of the fact the creatures are just the weird worm guys from the movie, rather than anything particularly monstrous. And when enemies do start showing up, they're just momentary flashes of intensity in what is otherwise a stone-cold frying pan. Their placement never feels like a crescendo crescendo of rising tension, they just sort of pop up after a while. Most of the time they don't even create the sense that you're going in the right direction, because the place is so damn small. After a while it seems impossible that you could have possibly missed anything, and once you reach that point, the game becomes extremely frustrating. It doesn't help that there's usually so much visual noise in the backgrounds that it can be difficult to see what you're meant to interact with, and what is just atmospheric clutter. Like in Resident Evil, most of the interactive things in any given area are just set dressing, but unlike Resident Evil, Men in Black does a terrible job of distinguishing between what's important and what isn't. There are never any short messages commenting on unimportant aspects of the level. Instead, there are sound effects or voice lines that don't really tell you anything. This dog might stand out, but how about this vending machine, which you can also interact with even though it doesn't actually do anything? Hope you noticed this safe under the very obviously important computer on this desk, because you're going to need what's inside it in order to complete the level. You can even flush the toilet if you want. What's worse is that the diaries and journals and audio logs you can find scattered around the base very rarely give any sort of indication of what you're meant to do to progress. They provide atmosphere, certainly, and help stoke the fires of the mystery, but they never actually provide any answers to what's going on, or offer any hints the player might use for a puzzle. Resident Evil's own documents always highlighted important information in green, and more than that, kept a log of everyone found in its inventory. In Men in Black, you simply can't pick them up. There is exactly one document in the second level the game deigns to let you keep, because a later puzzle would be rendered effectively impossible without it on hand. But otherwise, if you want to read or listen to a document again, you have to run around the level and seek it out. And even if they do contain important information, it's never highlighted for the player's sake. As if you could even read what this says anyway. So what can you do? Turn on the power, carve yourself off a cut of meat for a late night Arctic snack, stumble into a shotgun trap in the bathroom, hang out with this goodest of boys, listen to some Lovecraftian diary entries, turn on the power. Hang on, I already did that one. If you return to the vending machine room, you start taking damage because why wouldn't you? And that's about it. Guess I'm stuck. At this point I became convinced that whatever I needed was underneath this dog, because it was the only obviously interactive thing left in the level. I had vague memories from my original playthrough of giving the dog a meat treat in exchange for some kind of item, but it just would not accept the offering. Nor would this tiny bowl in the corner that you can barely see. I spent so long pixel hunting for the exact position in which the bowl might accept my offering of frozen steak that I accidentally completed a different objective by interacting with this tiny telegraph key that you can barely make out from the background. I even left the radio room and went to the kennel to see if any of the bowls there were willing to take the meat off my hands. Nope. It got to the point where I started checking every centimetre of the level with a fine-toothed comb, hoping that I might have missed something in some dark forgotten corner of the base. I got so desperate that I started punching and kicking various parts of the level, and holy shit, that worked? Yeah, you can kick doors open in this game. Actually, no, that's incorrect. Let me rephrase. You can kick 3, count them, 3 doors open in this game, and this is one of them. Here are the other 2 back in New York. In concept, it's a cool mechanic, but it's so underutilized, I actually forgot it was in the game by the time I reached this point, and it's never properly tutorialized either, of course. The first door you can kick open in New York doesn't look like a destructible bit of scenery, it looks like a wall. Attacking it is probably the last thing you'd think to do with it. I only did so because I vaguely remembered doing it during my original playthrough. There's no mention of the mechanic in the manual either, not in the section on combat, nor in the section on navigation. I don't know how you're meant to figure it out, other than through desperately throwing everything at the wall to see what breaks it open. Oh, but don't worry, the manual isn't completely useless. It might not explain how to play the game, but it does tell you to eat your vegetables. Are there any vegetables in the game? No, but the developers and publishers would like to encourage you gamers to eat right. We recommend asparagus. Asparagus, it's green and good, just like Shrek's fat cock. Here in the Arctic, you already need the kennel key card to even access the door before you discover it's frozen shut. I assumed it must be a puzzle in the style of Resident Evil, that I would require some sort of item to break or melt the ice. I didn't think you could just slap it off the fucking door. Silly me for thinking you might need something to get rid of the ice, like, I don't know, this ice axe? It didn't matter anyway. Inside was just more of the same. Diary, item, enemy spawning out of a corner you could clearly see when you first entered the room. My hopes were expertly dashed across the floor of this field hospital just as quickly as they were raised. At least the injection stopped the random damage in the vending machine room. Then it was back to scouring the level for anything else I'd missed. Oh. And this is as far as I got. I was able to bumble my way through the game up to this point, but here I found myself stuck. Hard stuck. I checked every room up and down, clicked on everything that even remotely looked like it might be interactive, and everything that didn't too. I reloaded saves, thinking I might have passed an invisible trigger in the level and soft-locked myself. I checked walkthroughs from 20 years ago in search of answers. Nothing. I was completely lost, so I turned to the only hope I had left. I contacted my friend and asked him what the fuck I was supposed to do. And in his wisdom he replied, "What the fuck are you doing?" I wish I fucking knew. I asked him if he remembered how to activate the computer in the Arctic level, and he answered, "You need the disc." But where's the disc? If it's under the dog, I'm fucked. I don't remember. Please! I think it was in a locker. So I went and checked the lockers. Nothing. I even reloaded a save before I'd interacted with the lockers. And nope, still just a health pack and some shotgun shells. I then spent longer than I would care to admit trying to move the dog to see if the disc was hiding underneath, but the bowl just kept refusing the meat. By this point I was genuinely worried I might have to scrap the video. I was so desperate, I went and checked a playthrough on YouTube just to see what I was doing wrong, and what I discovered is one of the most baffling bugs I've ever experienced in any video game. I was doing nothing wrong. My friend's intel wasn't bad, the disc just wasn't spawning in. For some reason I cannot comprehend, the game was replacing it with a health pack in this locker, a health pack which you would normally find here in place of these shotgun shells. It's a glitch that doesn't seem real. I've never encountered a game spawning in the wrong item instead of something critical to progress before. It wasn't tied to a specific save either. I reloaded my master save at the Men in Black headquarters and played through the start of the level again with a different character. And just to be certain, I even started an entirely new game to see if it would fix things. But nothing I did worked. This copy is just fucked. I suppose now I should come clean that I haven't actually been playing Men in Black for the Sony PlayStation on the Sony PlayStation. I was playing the PC version, mostly because it looks and plays and sounds and is much better. And needless to say, I bought it legally through legitimate channels. That said, I don't remember ever downloading it. It just appeared on my hard drive one day, and to my horror it actually ran, or at least it seemed to. This was definitely a snag I was not expecting to trip me up, but it wasn't a huge problem because while I could find no information online about the disc glitch or potential DRM, I did find a lot of cheats. For reasons I really don't understand, and honestly don't really want to, if you type the word dogmatic while hovering the cursor over the new game option in the pause menu, you activate cheat mode, allowing you to, among other things, give yourself every weapon in the game, give yourself infinite ammo, infinite health, and even switch characters on the fly. You can even play as a secret extra Man in Black, Agent X. Yeah, they added a dedicated button to remove the Ray-Bans. Except for Agent L, because I don't really know honestly. Misogyny, I guess. What a weird thing to add in, and an even weirder thing to leave out. You know what, I think I'm gonna keep these on. Anyway, most importantly, you can skip to the start of any level in the game. There we go, video saved. We can continue. But we can't just continue, can we? Can I really call this review complete if I leave part of the Arctic level unexplored? This game's already pretty short. It would be like leaving out the dormitory in Resident Evil, or Grease in Tomb Raider. I was really hoping I wouldn't have to do this, but here we are. Welcome to Men in Black for the PlayStation 1, everyone. For realsies this time. We're going to be here for the duration. However, we will be popping back into the PC version now and then to get a better look at certain mechanics and areas. The different aspect ratios are to let you know which is which, and definitely not because I only figured out how to change it after recording. Anyway, now we can continue with the Arctic level. There's just one catch. We have to get back to it first.
Yeah, it's rewind time.
Oh, that's new. Bodes well. Returning to the hallway of existential dread, the difference in quality between the two versions becomes obvious. If Men in Black for the PC is a pretty, if non-functional mess, then Men in Black for the Sony PlayStation is a soggy, overflowing dumpster that hasn't been emptied in about 20 years. I should mention that the PS1 port was not made by Gigawatt Studios, but outsourced to the Collective, and they really fucked it up. The compression on the backgrounds is so bad you can barely tell what any of them are actually meant to depict, especially when the environments start getting crazy later on. It pushes what was already visual clutter into outright sight mud, and if you think that's bad, take a listen to this. That's not the fault of my very real Sony PlayStation. I've played this game on an actually very real Sony PlayStation, and the audio was genuinely this bad. It's not going to get better either. It's going to keep popping right through to the end credits. The sound design for the PC version wasn't great, but at least it didn't feel like you were listening to it through a blown out speaker. Oh, and if that wasn't enough, may I introduce to you input lag. For a limited time only, you too can experience the intense frustration of pressing a button and getting nothing in response. Coming off the relatively crisp controls of the PC version, this is a disaster. It genuinely takes entire seconds to cycle through the options on the main menu. This is embarrassing. And they actually sold this in actual shops for real units of currency. The audio visuals aren't the only things that have changed between systems. The "Mom says it's my turn to use the Xbox" energy radiating inventory screens and the pinup from the PC version are gone, but much worse is the change made to the game's save system. The PC version offered unlimited saves whenever you wanted. It was right there in the pause menu, but space is tight on a console, and after all, if save file restrictions worked for Resident Evil and Tomb Raider, why not? Why shouldn't they work for Men in Black? It should be stated that I don't think limited save systems can't work. The original Resident Evil used its ink ribbon typewriter combo to great effect, making each foray beyond the walls of a safe room that much more harrowing, especially if your supplies are low. Tomb Raider's save crystal system is something I find harder to defend. That game is challenging enough with the unlimited saves the PC version gives the player, and when I first attempted to play it back in the early 2000s, I bounced off the title hard, entirely because of how scarce they are. I'm not surprised the crystal system was dropped for Tomb Raider 2, but I'm also not surprised the typewriter system was preserved for Resident Evil's own sequels. There is a delicate balance you have to hit with a limited save system, and Resident Evil gets it just right. There are only a handful of rooms in the entire game with typewriters where you can save your progress, but they are spaced out so well that it creates the impression of being far from safety, while also giving the player a relatively quick run back to an item box if the inventory gets a little full. There's upwards of 30 ink ribbons to find around the Spencer Mansion too, so even if you're a fiend on the typewriter, there's a sense of scarcity without resorting to outright stinginess on the game's part. By comparison, Men in Black has a whopping 19 save points across the entire game, but here's the catch. You get to use each of them exactly once. They aren't like Resident Evil's typewriters, which can be used multiple times in one location, and they aren't like Tomb Raider's save crystals, which can be used once in any location. Men in Black's save points pop up exactly once when you trigger them, and that's it. They never appear again. Most of them save you right at the beginning of a screen you just entered too, so if there are any enemies present, you are going to have to fight them every single time you load in. Every single time. So if you're stuck on, say, a particularly hard jump, you're going to have to survive the same scraps over and over just for the chance to fail it again. And the more you fail, the more frustrated you're going to get, and the less patience you're going to have, and soon the fights are going to start killing you before you even get to the jump, and it just never ends. It just never ends, it just keeps going. What a great game. The PlayStation port's collapsed lung of a save system is the entire reason I was hoping to make this video only using the PC version of Men in Black. I knew I would have to talk about it eventually, but I was really hoping I wouldn't have to experience it again. Because it's not just that the game gives the option exactly once when you cross some arbitrary threshold, it's that they're spaced out in the most frustrating places. You get one for picking up a keycard in the kennel of the Arctic base, and after talking to this guy in the tavern in the second level, both things that are extremely easy to stumble into without actually having done much in the level otherwise. Ironically, returning to the hallway of existential dread only felt authentic to the Men in Black experience. My friend and I had to abandon 2 entire runs and begin the game again from scratch during our playthrough because of soft locks the game was all too happy to let us stumble right into. Back then, I took it with a kind of grudging acceptance, but this time I was pissed. I was not in the right frame of mind to play through this section again, especially not with it looking and sounding like this. Save states could only soften so much of the blow. I just wanted to get back up to the Arctic level and continue from where I left off, but I just couldn't do it. After making it through the New York level with surprising ease on the PC, here I started falling into all the same pits that my friend and I had during our original playthrough. I was so annoyed that I actually had to get up and leave the game alone for a whole week. I could not stomach even another second of this shit, and it seems like contemporary reviewers couldn't either. Not that I could find many reviews for this game. When I made my Jurassic Park retrospective, I found myself drowning in all the media coverage each of those games got. Here though, I felt lucky finding a single page ad in an old magazine, but the few contemporary reviews I could find were pretty unanimously bad. GameSpot's Lauren Fielder gave it a scathing 3.4, and Calvin Hobble of Game Revolution wasn't much kinder, saying, "At least it's better than Will Smith's rapping." First of all, Calvin, how fucking dare you? That song is a fucking masterpiece. Here's another YouTube-friendly sample. And in this 3-hour video essay, the one outlier was an article in Next Generation that claimed, quote, "Following GoldenEye, this may be the second movie-based game of any merit," end quote. And no, what the fuck are you talking about? No. Men in Black is capable of giving licensed games a much needed shot in the arm. Yeah, a shot of bleach maybe. I wonder what the writer thought when the game actually came out. I guess we'll never know, because as far as I can tell, the magazine never actually reviewed it. And we're back. The week away from the game did me a world of good, and I smashed back up to where the PC version shat the bed in about 20 minutes. With the disc in hand, I was finally able to boot up the computer in the lobby and scan the security cameras for any sign of extraterrestrials. I was finally able to give the dog a treat, too, and after all that I got a small med pack. Oh, okay. What I dislike about this, having to look at the security cameras, not the dog. The dog is fine. The dog did nothing wrong. Is that it forces the player into a very linear sequence of events that requires a huge amount of trial and error to complete. One aspect of the level I really like is the shotgun trap in the bathroom, because you can potentially avoid it if you notice the barrel poking through the wall here. By comparison, there is no way to know you're going to take damage when you return to the vending machine room after turning on the power. It basically forces you to take damage in a game where health is already pretty scarce, and the only way to avoid it is to first kick this door open, and second, use this vaccine you find inside on yourself, something you cannot do with any other item in the game. One of the things I really love about the original Resident Evil, and to a lesser extent the original Tomb Raider, is the level of player agency throughout every section of those games. Both titles ultimately have one solution to any given puzzle or area, but you as the player are usually free to tackle each step in any order you wish. Resident Evil's story fundamentally changes depending on some of the choices you make. Characters can die if you take too long to find them. Boss fights can change depending on how much preparation you do beforehand. The game accounts for a huge number of variables right up to its closing moments. And the freedom Tomb Raider gives the player to tackle each section of a level on their own terms makes each run that much more personal. In Men in Black, there is one predetermined path that every player has to take. You cannot do the steps out of order. And the levels are so small there's no room for deviation or exploration anyway. The spaceship hidden in the ice is only a pleasant stroll away from the outpost, but you have to find a trail on the security cameras before the game will allow you to reach it. It just feels so arbitrary in the same way old adventure games do, where it's less about figuring out a logical solution and more about figuring out what the level designer thought was a logical solution. Even something as simple as not being able to use the ice axe or the flare on the frozen door in instead of kicking it open feels like such a wasted opportunity. In an environment so small, I think it would have been really cool to add in a bunch of different solutions to each of the puzzles, such as they are, but it's just not there. I'm not asking for a full-on Men in Black immersive sim. Deus Ex already exists, but the rigid way in which the game forces you to complete its levels is smothering. And the worst thing is, I kind of get the sense the developers did want to include multiple routes for each level, but they just ran out of time, or ran out of money, or ran out of fucks to give. They certainly ran out of fucks to give on the sound design. I've already ragged on the ambient sounds and the crunchy quality of the PS1 port's audio, but that is barely scratching the surface. They put no effort into this. I would critique the music, but there's basically none. There are a handful of musical stings, but none of them last more than 45 seconds, and all of them are just so generic.
No, you can't take me. I won't let you. I won't. Ah.
I'll take that.
Stand by, shooter. Begin. Good eye. Enough! Good stuff.
Now, Resident Evil is no stranger to bad music. Just take a listen to these butt trumpets. But for the most part, its proper soundtrack is fantastic. Just listen to these tracks. They add so much character and atmosphere to the game, even if you're just watching a playthrough of it. Tomb Raider is just the same. The music might not be as constant as in Resident Evil, but when it does pick up, it just adds so much to whatever's happening on screen. Finding an important item, entering a new area, dodging a trap, It all intensifies the sense of adventure that comes with playing the game, and it's just great music too. The main Tomb Raider theme is iconic for a reason. Both games know what kind of music to use for any given scene, and there is a lot of it too, from both games. Resident Evil knows when to let the atmosphere marinate in synthetic strings, or ratchet up the tension in battle with some kind of undead monstrosity. Tomb Raider knows to pique your curiosity and sense of adventure with uplifting orchestral swells that leave you wanting to see more, or to get your blood pumping when suddenly thrust into a fight or a trap. Men in Black, by comparison, just can't compete. Like with its backgrounds, it knows when to put musical stings, but not why or how. And there is so little variety in what can only very loosely be called the game's soundtrack that it loses all impact by the end of the Arctic level. You're always going to hear the same kooky sci-fi riff, and you're always going to hear the same jump scare sting. Oh my god, an alien! That may be the most blessed sound in any video game ever made. You know what? That was so good, I'm bumping up Men in Black's score from an absolute 0 to an absolute 0. If I ever become a streamer, that's going to be my sub alert. I'm being sarcastic, but I do genuinely love that sound effect. It is the only good audio thing to come out of this disaster, because the rest of them,
You're not my type. Here it comes. Good eye.
All right, sweethearts, I'm coming in.
Not great. Most of the weapons use the same limp, crunchy sound effects. The enemies have different grunts and screams, but you're going to hear all of them thousands upon thousands of times before the credits roll. And all of the dialogue is delivered like the 2, maybe 3 voice actors they could get for the game were fast asleep in the recording booth.
I'm coming.
I don't blame the voice actors for that. They were probably rushed or underpaid or just people the developers had around the office. But it does sap even more energy out of the already near catatonic vibe of the game. Say what you will about Resident Evil's voice acting, at least it has character.
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
It is easy to see why so many of its lines became memes. And Tomb Raider's dialogue, while still pretty campy, adds quite a bit of tension to the story.
I don't know where his little jackrabbit frog legs are running him to. You'll have to ask Miss Natalie.
Thank you. I will.
And the voice actors are clearly having fun. Men in Black's voice actors are just not.
Swank, isn't it?
Doggy. Big mean doggy.
I've got to have a talk with Zed. I'm getting too old for these ice jobs.
At all. The only thing I can really praise about Men in Black's sound design, aside from the blessed is that it does feature a lot of unique dialogue. Each of the 3 player characters have a ton of unique one-liners for entering a new area or defeating certain enemies.
You enjoy your work, don't you?
It was a pleasure, gentlemen. Let's get together real soon. Promise.
So is that it? We done?
Entire conversations with NPCs change depending on whether you're playing as J, K, or L.
What do you want?
I'm looking for a man named Francisco.
What do you want from Francisco?
Some information?
Information? Who are you?
A friend.
Ha! There are no friends in Cara del Diablo. You want something, you pay.
I can pay.
No, you pay me with ticket out. Then we talk information, friend.
Francisco?
Who wants to know?
A friend.
Ha!
I need some information about the mine. I heard you might be the man to talk to.
Information? You pay for information. You pay with a ticket out. That's the only way you get information from Francisco. Beat it. I have no money.
Are you Francisco?
I told you I have no money.
I don't want money. I want information.
You? Information? What kind of information?
I thought maybe you could tell me about the attacks in the mine. I'm going down there.
You? You can't be serious.
Are you going to help?
Maybe we can work something out. Comprende?
Yeah, I comprende mucho. I'm not that kind of girl.
Bueno. You want information? I want a ticket out.
A ticket out.
Si.
There are a lot of unique sound effects too for when you're interacting with bits of the background, like this door at the end of the hallway of Existential Dread,
Doggy. Big mean doggy.
or this vending machine in the Arctic base. It's not a huge point of praise, but it's something. Though to be completely honest, I think it would have saved them all a lot of time and a lot of effort to just have the characters say nothing uncommon or nothing unusual, just to eliminate confusion regarding what in the background is important to level progression and what isn't. I understand the desire to put in more detail, but the game just gives up on the idea after a while, and the sound quality is so poor that it just doesn't seem worth it. Anyway, we are finally done with the first half of the Arctic level. Head on through to the spaceship and we can finally continue— whoop! And here we are. Wait, why can't I move? Game? Hello? What's going on? Am I stuck again? Why is the grab animation playing over and over? What happened to the sound? Game, are you fucking serious? No! No! What a great game. Alright, I've restarted everything. I'm going to try it again. Moment of truth. Let's see if this works.
No one told me this place had a basement.
Okay, restarting fixed it. Apparently that can just happen. That's the second time I've almost had to scrap this video. Anyways, the spaceship under the ice may not be the worst section of the game, but it is definitely the most boring. You wander through a series of dull rooms, fight through a gauntlet of enemies, solve some very rudimentary puzzles, and that's pretty much it. Which, admittedly, is a sentence that could also be used to describe the recently released Callisto Protocol. But at least that game looks nice. This spaceship is just so boring. They're clearly trying to invoke H.R. Giger with the visuals, which is not in itself a horrible idea, but they do it in the blandest way possible, and it clashes so hard with the kooky movie-inspired enemy design and terrible sound effects. So many of the rooms are just empty corridors or hallways. Maybe they have a weird little alien console or a random item, but that's usually it. The game makes no attempt to explain what anything you find actually does either. Everything just looks like random background detail. The red key doesn't go with the red door. There isn't even a red door with which the red key can go. This thing in the background here, if you don't interact with it, you can't finish the level. What is it? What does it do? I don't know. Just press it. This thing here, this is the level exit. You find it halfway through the map. How are you meant to know it ends the mission? Fuck you! Hey, did you know enemies can drop key items? Did you know enemies can drop items at all? No? Should have read the manual. Just kidding, it doesn't tell you that either. Fuck you. Hey, you get that out of here. I've already written the joke. Oh, and remember that safe under the computer desk? I hope you found the flare inside it, because you need it here to get into the second half of the spaceship, and if you don't have it, you're soft-locked. Just kidding, the devs put one down here anyway because they knew people would miss it the first time around. It uninstantiates if you pick it up with the first flare already in your inventory. What a great game. The thing is, I think with enough time you could probably trial and error adventure game logic bullshit your way through this spaceship. There are only so many things to interact with and so many items in your inventory that eventually you'll just be able to brute force it, like I did kicking the icy door open. But you don't have enough time to brute force it. You don't have time at all. As soon as you enter the spaceship, a secret countdown starts that the game never bothers to inform you of, and if the timer reaches 0, that's it. Game over. And the spaceship is also a maze, and the enemies respawn. Of course they do. Why wouldn't they? It's a pretty substantial countdown too. It's not like Resident Evil's 3 minutes to self-destruct. I spent over 15 minutes running around in circles through the spaceship and almost managed to complete it before the timer hit 0. I know in the recording it looks like I caused the explosion by pressing this button on the console. And side note, but how the fuck are you meant to figure out you're supposed to press this specific part of the screen? Just because the cursor changes? Actually, never mind, I'm getting off topic. And it's really not helped by the fact the developers were so rushed they had to include the mission failed cutscene inside the mission complete cutscene. But I swear it just happened at the perfect moment. I reloaded and did it again, no worries. At least the maze itself isn't too difficult to navigate. It's a maze only in the barest sense of the word. Throughout the spaceship you'll come across random doors that are just one-way loops back to the starting room. They do contain goodies like health and ammo and the flare if you haven't picked it up yet, but otherwise they're just present to waste your time. Oh no, it's me. Once you know what you're doing, you can complete the spaceship in about 5 minutes. You can bypass just about every enemy, and the puzzles are so basic they barely qualify for the name. Punch man, pick up key, open door, wash, rinse, repeat. The rest of them are just adventure game logic madness, like how you use the flare to blind an alien security camera to get through a door. Just as well you brought the Ray-Bans. There's only one section of the spaceship that I really want to praise, and it's this room here, because this is the only part of the level that actually matches the tone of horror that it has tried so hard to create since the player was unceremoniously dumped at the start of the mission. Seeing a fellow MIB agent gummed up in some weird alien pod and reduced to a brain in a suit, sunnies and all, is actually a pretty effective and creepy image. It is a great climactic moment for the level in terms of tone and body horror, and a glimpse at what this game could have been had it received the time and money and effort it so desperately needed to be good. Shame they spoiled it in the briefing cutscene. And with that we are finally done with level 1. Hang on, why was the guy in the pod? How did he become a brain man? What were the aliens doing at the Arctic outpost? What infection was spreading through the researchers? The numbers, Mason, what do they mean? How did the spaceship exploding resolve the problem? What is happening in this game? Mission 2 is set in the Amazon, and this is really faint praise, but it is easily the best level in the game. Well, no, that's wrong. Let me rephrase that. It is the least worst level in the game. Actually, no, that's still wrong. It is the most potentially interesting level in the game, in that it gives you a glimpse at what the developers were probably aiming for before whatever happened. Once again, the setup for the mission is actually pretty decent. Strange reports have been coming out of Para El Diablo, a mining town hidden deep in the Amazon rainforest owned by the Tentrix Company. Or is it the Tentrex Company? I'm not sure. The name is spelled differently on the same document. Anyway, according to rumours, the miners have uncovered something at the bottom of the mine. Something otherworldly. And it's unleashed a plague of madness onto the town. The T-Rex Company won't let anyone leave. No one knows what's going on. Looks like it's up to the Men in Black to sneak in and set things right. It's a great idea. Once again, it's not really Men in Black, but it's a great hook for a horror game, and the atmosphere actually kind of lives up to the potential for one brief moment. This is the one point in the game where the distant camera angles actually kind of work. It gives you the sense that you're being watched by something much larger than yourself, something far more impersonal and calculating. And you are. The town is covered in armed guards keeping an eye on things from every direction. It's only when you run close to a building and out of their line of sight that the camera angles move back into something more claustrophobic. The guards aren't the only ones around town either. There are a bunch of civilians just hanging around. Some are hostile, some are just trying to go about their business and will leave you alone. A few are actively trying to escape. The town, tiny though it is, actually feels like a place in the process of collapse that you have just stumbled into right before it passes the point of no return. The stranglehold the Tentrex Company has over the inhabitants is made explicitly clear, and it's obvious the miners fear their employer just as much as they are terrified of confronting whatever they discovered at the bottom of the mine. There's an atmosphere of genuine dread that hangs over this brief section of the level, and for the few minutes that it lasts, it's great. There's no bonkers nightmare logic when it comes to figuring out what you're meant to do here either. The backgrounds are less cluttered and the important interactive elements are well telegraphed through lighting or positioning. The key items all do things you would expect them to do. For example, the credit card is actually used as a credit card, and not something insane clean like a key or a doorstop. And best of all, the game actually gives you directions on where to go and what to do. The Men in Black have an informant already in place, so your first task is to find them. You are encouraged to explore the town in order to find the informant, but it's not actually your goal. You can finish the level without ever laying eyes on them, but by giving you the initial objective of wandering the town and inspecting all the buildings in your search, you're going to come across Francisco, one of the miners hiding out above the bar, and he is the one who gives you your next goal, getting him a ticket out of town in exchange for information on how to get into the mine. This is a side note, but I really like how Francisco is incorporated into the background here. It's a really clever use of the survival horror style. To get him a ticket you need a credit card, but that is also something you'll come across naturally as you explore the town. One of the buildings you can enter is a medical clinic manned by a very stressed doctor who will attack on sight once he sees you. It's on his beaten corpse that you'll find the credit card needed to buy Francisco a ticket home. The medical clinic is a feast of atmosphere too. The infected miner on the bed, the doctor's hastily scribbled notes, the chaotic mess of dropped medical supplies, it's all really good. The environmental storytelling is super effective. You've probably already seen where you need to take the credit card too. You saw it the second you arrived. And where else would you go to buy a boat ticket home but the dock? It all makes sense. Get the ticket to Francisco and he'll point you in the right direction. To get the keys to the mine you'll need to touch the chupacabra, which if you've been exploring thoroughly, will lead you right back to the alleyway behind the medical clinic. And what do you know? Touching the goat sucker gets you into the backyard of the administration building. Alternatively, if you're brave enough, you could always just storm the front door. Ha-ha! I'm kidding. The guards don't care if you run past them. The door they're guarding isn't even functional. You can't fight them anyway. They're invincible. Unfortunately, this is the point where the mission's surprisingly good pacing ends. The rest of the Amazon mission from this point onward is just a return to the linear, insane puzzle logic slog that the rest of the game has been and will continue to be until it's over, which is a real shame because this section is genuinely decent and gives you a sense of what exactly the developers were aiming for when they set out to make the game. Don't get me wrong, it's still got its fair share of weird jank. For example, the guards frisk you at the gate before you enter town, but don't actually take your weapons. And if you do actually find the informant, well...
Boy, am I glad I didn't drink that. I look terrible in flippers.
What took you so long?
Traffic was a bitch.
There are other weird little things too that give me the impression that the level, and presumably the entire game, was meant to be much larger and far more non-linear. For example, when you return to the dock with the credit card, the guards have been replaced by this drunk old man. You can have a conversation with him and he mentions wanting to leave town, but you can't buy him a ticket or give him Francisco's. You can't do anything for him. The informant gives you a gun, but doesn't actually tell you anything about how to progress. There are all these buildings you can't get into even though they're guarded and have backgrounds made for their front doors. It feels like you were originally meant to have access to so much more of the town, and that you originally had a lot more choice in how you made your way through it. Imagine how amazing that would be. Maybe you meet up with the informant and follow their advice. Maybe you stumble onto Francisco and help him escape. Maybe you take pity on a drunk old man and he surprises you by helping you into the mine. Maybe you could help the doctor find a cure to the infection ravaging the town. Maybe by going out of your way to help one, you seal the fate of the others. And since we're here, let's extrapolate. Maybe some of the people you meet are working to their own agenda and lying to you about their intentions. Maybe you could try to break the company's death grip on its employees by exposing its unethical work practices. Maybe you could break the company by liberating the town. Maybe you could just do your job and focus on the alien threat down the mine. Perhaps by siding with one character you would get to explore parts of the town you wouldn't by siding with another. And by extension, maybe you only get the whole story by playing through every iteration of the level. And this is all before you even get into the mine. Imagine how incredible that would be with this scenario, let alone with Men in Black's other 3 missions. I joked before that I'm not looking for a Men in Black immersive sim, but I don't know, maybe I am. Has anyone ever made a retro survival horror immersive sim? Am I going to have to make a retro survival horror immersive sim? It's always disappointing when your favourite aspect of a game is something you've projected onto it, but hey, that's just the way it goes sometimes. Even more disappointing is that the rest of the level is complete shit.
Bummer.
The effort that went into the early section of the level might as well evaporate between these two screens. The Chupacabra didn't just open the door when you touched it, it sucked out all the good design decisions and intuitive game mechanics that the mission had been making fantastic use of up to this point. We're back to random enemies standing in corners and key items lying around the environment like someone just tossed them in through a window. The camera angles go back to being awful too. This fight is made next to impossible due to the fact the camera is positioned somewhere in the next fucking universe compared to your chosen Men in Black agent. The last obstacle before the gate to the mines is this gauntlet of spotlights, and it is barely a puzzle. You're meant to avoid the lights, but the damage you take if one spots you is so small that there's no reason not to just run straight through to the gate. Thus we reach the mines. Welcome to hell. Abandon hope, ye who enter here. The mines are the reason I wanted to make this video. It is a non-stop gauntlet of horrible game design. It is a masterclass in what not to do. There's so much to unpack here, I genuinely don't know where to begin. From my tone of voice, I'm sure you're expecting me to tell you this is another timed maze, but no. Oh, I bet that a maze is what the mine was meant to be. The intent is clearly there, but like so much of this game, they didn't have the time or budget for that, so it's just a linear series of tunnels with two side rooms off the main entrance. It starts off pretty well with the run across this old dilapidated bridge, and the encounter with your first roly-poly chasing this freaked out miner. Look at him go. You have to kill the roly-poly, but fun fact, you can also kill the miner if you're quick enough. You know what, maybe this actually is an immersive sim. There's no reason to stop the miner, but you do definitely have to defeat the roly-poly, because he drops a key item. One of 3 in fact. The second is just on a miner in the next room. You don't even have to stay and fight the enemy here, you can just grab the thing and leave. Job done. There's not even any reason to go into the second side room, it's just another boring fight for a tiny amount of ammo. This is what I meant when I said it feels like there's meant to be a huge maze here, with a bunch of intersecting tunnels and dead ends, but they just couldn't achieve their vision, so instead just dumped the key items right next to each other at the very start of the area. If that's actually true and not just conjecture on my part, I'm not that upset the maze was cut. Once you've got the 2 reliefs from the start of the mine, it's just a short run down this tunnel to the moment this game goes from simply bad to absolutely atrocious. Just look at it. The gaping chasm, the moving platforms, the armed roly-poly spinning like a turret to MLG 360 no-scope you in slow motion. This is it. This is the moment I have been looking forward to tearing apart this whole video. This screen is the reason my friend brought Men in Black to my attention when we played it together back in 2019, because this is as far into the game as he ever got on his own. Every time he had gone back to it over the years, he had reached this point and just thrown in the towel. In that interview with CD Magazine I quoted before, David Koenig estimated around 25 to 35 hours of gameplay, which is, okay, sure, whatever David, you keep huffing that copium. But in my friend's case, he was actually lowballing by about 183,930 hours. This was his gaming white whale, so I guess we'd better slay it. Before we even get into the jumping puzzle itself, you need to deal with MLG roly-poly on the other side of the chasm, and melee is not an option. Not only is this dude doing a 360 no-scope on you, he's camping. There is no way to reach him up on his pillar of sin, and even if you could jump your way into melee range, you have maybe 10 seconds at most before he turns around and starts blasting. Your only option is to pull out a gun and pray you can find him in your sights before he finds you in his. I'm going to save the discussion on the combat for later, because that is a whole other can of worms, but to give you a little wriggly entree, the aiming system in this game does not work like Resident Evil's as you might expect. Keen-eyed viewers may have noticed little circles appearing on enemies while engaging in ranged combat, and it is only when those circles light up that you know you are going to hit your target. And the margin for error is narrow. You can make shots without the circle lighting up first, but it's never a sure thing. Painting a target guarantees a hit, it's just an absolute fucking bastard finding the right angle to do so. You can be aiming directly at an enemy but somehow get a target on someone else standing behind them. So the second you enter this area, it becomes a race between you and the MLG roly-poly to take the bloody shot. You can stun lock enemies with guns if you're quick enough on the draw, but they can do the exact same thing to you if they get there first, and you don't have the space here to reposition if you can't get a good angle like you can in most other encounters. It is so easy to walk right off the edge of the cliff here, because it's so unclear where the game thinks the actual edge is compared to where the background presents it to be. And if you do fall, or fail at any point during this puzzle, on the PS1 version, have fun going back through the entirety of the mine in order to reach this screen again and take another shot at this smug bastard.
Fucking camper.
Remember when I mentioned way back when I was talking about the New York level, how having to go through the tedious combat encounters each time you reload a save, just to have another chance at one of the far more difficult jumps between buildings created a vicious cycle of frustration? This section of the mines is that on steroids. If you fail this screen, you have to go through at least 2 combat encounters with the roly-poly from the start of the mine, and MLG roly-poly upon his throne of grief. But you also might have to go through a third in this side room with Mr. Chonky if you're low on ammo, because like I said, there's no way to defeat this guy without a gun, and how would you know that if you've never played the game before? At least once you deal with the MLG roly-poly, the time-sensitive aspect of this puzzle is done with. You can take all the time in the world getting through the rest of it, but the knowledge that you're going to have to do it all again on the game's terms if you fail never goes away. It is going to hang over you for every single second you spend on this screen, so let's get to it. I haven't really spoken about the game's jumping mechanics before, because up to this point they haven't really been used in any major way. The last time was back in New York. The Arctic level didn't feature it at all, and after this point in the Amazon level, it's never really required again, unless you're too slow getting to these elevators at the start of the final level. This moment is the mechanical climax of Men in Black's jumping puzzles, and in terms of difficulty spikes, it is like going from climbing Mount Kosciuszko to climbing Mount Everest. Just about every other jump in the game up to this point has been rendered needlessly difficult by unhelpful camera angles. Like with the aiming, jumping requires pinpoint accuracy that fixed camera angles really can't provide the way they are positioned here. Take the jumps I've already mentioned on the New York rooftops. You're not given a good view of the gap between the buildings either because they're too far away or too close to the edge of the screen, and Agent J inevitably ends up blocking what little look you do get when you step up to make the jump. Just to add insult to injury, the screens change the moment you jump off the roof, and it is so jarring, especially with how long it takes to load between backgrounds. I get why they made it that way though. If you can actually find an angle where the game can't hide the jump from you, it's fucking hilarious. These are probably the worst offenders before, you know. But the first jump in the game is pretty poorly telegraphed too. Even a step out of line and you're in for a long drop and a sudden stop. A missed jump is an instant death too, which makes sense when jumping between buildings or across bottomless pits, but comes off as a little unfair when you miss something like this. Come on, that was barely a drop. I don't even know how I missed it. It's so inconsistent, or at least it feels that way given you can barely see where you're jumping half the time. The only real jumping puzzle prior to the Amazon level is this section in the New York mission where you have to climb up the side of a building using a big pile of boxes someone just dumped on the side of the road. And, well, even when the platforms are stationary, it can be a nightmare. The game is as strict with accepting you've actually jumped at or landed on a platform as it is vague with where the edges of those platforms actually lie. It's just so clunky. It's one of those things where watching a video of it just can't convey the jank, or the input lag, or the moment of terror in your heart where you don't know whether you've made it or been sent back to the last save. And that's all before you add in the complication of moving platforms. There's only one other point in the game that presents a jumping puzzle anywhere close in challenge to this chasm in the Amazon mission, and about 20 years ago when this video started, I gave a quick glimpse of it before moving on. That's right, this monstrosity in the obstacle course back in MIBHQ you. I think I've already said enough to explain why this is a bad tutorial, but at the very least it warns you of the possibility that there might be more puzzles like it somewhere in the game, but only if you can get that far into this 3 rage games in a trench coat of a tutorial, and like I've already mentioned, there's just no reason to play it. The game already threw you in the deep end with the New York level. This is just unnecessary extra pain. While we're on the subject of tutorials, I want to pivot back to Tomb Raider for a moment. I've already gushed about Croft Manor and how fantastic a learning tool it is for new players, but for those uninterested in giving it a go, the game also goes out of its way to provide a decent jumping puzzle tutorial in the second level, the city of Vilcabamba. Up to this point, the jumps have been pretty simple. There's been a few climbing sections and a few bigger jumps, but nothing too crazy. That changes once you reach this tower structure. In order to open the central door and continue, you need to climb up both towers and pull the levers at their summits. This is the first major jumping puzzle in the game. Both towers require a decent amount of coordination to climb, and introduce a lot of the different moves that the player will need to complete the entire game. Standing jumps, running jumps, mantling. It gives you the chance to take things fast by layering the floor with these collapsing platforms. And if you're skilled enough, you can actually use them to progress. But if you're more of a beginner, they help reinforce the fact that this game rewards technique over speed in most cases. But what I like most about this section is that while it does present the greatest amount of verticality seen in the game up to this point, it does so above 2 pools of water. Don't get me wrong, it is very possible to take damage in these sections from a bad jump or an unlucky fall, but most of the time you'll just end up in the water and all you have to do is climb out and start again. It doesn't punish you for not being a master Tomb Raider so early in the game. Like with Croft Manor, you're given all the time and attempts you need to complete the puzzle. It's a great introduction to the jumping mechanics within the campaign itself, and an example of how something early on in a game can still be challenging without being unfair. The first jump you make in Men in Black is into a dumpster, and you can die from it. Fuck you. What a great game. Something else notable about Tomb Raider is that it never features a jumping puzzle with moving platforms. Not once. I played the entirety of the game just to check if there was ever an instance of a moving platform in a jumping puzzle, and there isn't. For the vast majority of the game, you are free to take the puzzles at your own pace. It is only during the last couple of levels that they add obstacles to ratchet up the urgency, like rolling boulders or collapsing platforms. But at no point is the player required to jump onto something that's moving, or from something that's moving. Even with a fully 3D environment and a third-person camera, the developers understood the limits of their game's mechanics. It struggles with edges enough as it is. Could you imagine trying to make some of these jumps onto or from a moving platform? And since we're here, we might as well take a look at Resident Evil's jumping puzzles too. What's that? It doesn't have any? Wow, it's almost like jumping mechanics just don't fit very well into a fixed camera survival horror game. I never would have guessed. During our 2019 playthrough, this was the moment my friend had been waiting for. He wanted me to suffer the way he had suffered. He expected us to be stuck at it for weeks. It took me an hour. I don't know what to tell you. Sometimes all you need to solve a problem is a fresh set of eyes. I don't blame him for getting it wrong for so long though. I only lucked into the solution by complete accident. See this platform? It looks like it's moving back and forth along the Z-axis, but it is actually moving up and down along the Y-axis. The only way I figured it out was when I took a chance leap from the previous platform while this one was at its lowest point, and still landed on it rather than falling to my death. I wasn't even aiming for it either. I figured it must be a bait, a trap, and so was just trying to bypass it. Either way, once you know where all the platforms are going, it is still a shitty puzzle because it is an absolute crapshoot whether the game deigns to let you make a jump or not. It's still super easy to slide off the edge of a platform, or completely screw up the aim of a jump because of the awkward camera angle and terrible controls. Even knowing what to do, we still failed it once or twice. So here we are, at the end of all things, at the furthest from the Shire my friend has ever been. From this point on, we were both in uncharted waters. We had no idea what to expect. Beyond the jumping puzzle from hell is a short gauntlet of puzzles and combat encounters that only sink to lower and lower depths of insanity the further into the mine you venture, culminating in the game's first big boss fight. The first puzzle actually isn't terrible from a design standpoint. You need to input the right pattern through these raised stones in the floor for each relief you put down to unlock the door to the alien ruins underneath the mine. The first one is easy, you just walk across the stones and you're done, but the other two reliefs increase the difficulty by changing which parts of the square rise or lower as a result of where you step. Better yet, you're allowed to keep the hint for the puzzle you can find back across the bridge in town. It's a decent challenge, and the only bit of the game's patented bullshit present is the fact that you have to do the reliefs in a specific order. It is the single shining zircon in what is otherwise one long river of shit. The alien ruins beyond the relief door actually look pretty good. I really like the design of the place. It feels sufficiently ancient and otherworldly, but you won't have any time to appreciate it because the second you enter this area, you will be too busy fighting for your life. Some of the Greys now have the ability to beam scenes from Lost's final season directly into your brain from across the fucking planet, and the resulting psychic damage is enough to drop you dead in seconds. Even if you do manage to close the gap, he knows Kung Fu. He's just going to bully the shit out of you and send you back to the last save. Not that you can close the gap either, because the crab crew is here to get in your way and ruin your day. And just as a cherry on top, none of them drop anything. Fuck you. What a great game. After that, it's a short jog down a flight of stairs and, that's it. A dead end. There's this weird little thing in the center of the room, but if you stand on it, it one-hit kills you. Thanks, game. It looks important, like you're meant to place an item there, but no. Nothing you have will work. There is nothing to do here but die. Back when we first played it, my friend and I figured we'd missed something, so we ran back up the stairs and through the rest of the ruins. Nothing. We even reloaded back before the jumping puzzle just to check if there was some sort of key item that we'd accidentally missed. Implausible as that sounded, but we had, and you're looking at it right now. Say hello to Mr. Invisible. He's there, I promise. We only figured out he was hanging around halfway up the steps once we stopped to examine the area and started taking phantom damage. It turns out reaching the bottom of the stairs acts as a spawn trigger for this guy, and just... why? Why would you give the player no indication that anything has changed? The backgrounds are the same, the enemy cannot be seen, and yet defeating him is the only way to actually progress. He doesn't follow you past this screen either, so if you zoom up the stairs to check out the other rooms, you'll never get any indication that he's there unless he happens to make a grunt as you pass by. And why wouldn't you zoom past? It's a flight of stairs! I'm going to have to refer to that quote about Battlefield Earth again because Men in Black clearly knows that other survival horror games use backtracking, but does not understand why, or even how. You need a far larger, far less linear space to throw in any sort of backtracking, but more importantly, you need locked doors that correspond to specific obvious keys, or obstacles that have clear solutions. Everyone gives the early Resident Evil games a lot of grief for how silly it is for, to give an example, a police station to use keys based on the suits in a deck of cards, but it makes the solution very clear. It tells you exactly what doors you need to backtrack to with what key to open them. When player action changes the game space in any way, it is usually communicated clearly. Hunters don't just show up once the player returns to the mansion, they get a big fancy FMV cutscene as an introduction, and they certainly aren't fucking invisible. Yet. When Jill or Rebecca tickle the ivories in the bar, it's not like doing so unlocks a secret room on the other side of the fucking building without telling you. Tomb Raider's exactly the same. It's rare that you'll come across a lever or lock that doesn't have an obvious clear purpose. And while it's not afraid to spawn enemies around you just out of sight, at least they have textures. It's worse than trial and error because there is no error here on the part of the player. It's just a cruel trap that you can't see coming. But the game is only too happy to stand aside and let you bumble into it, or in this case past it. Even once you know Mr. Invisible is there, it can be a nightmare to take him down because you can't see him. He'll just stand in place and bully you while you spin around desperately hoping to find the right angle that will actually land you a hit. After the first strike, it becomes much easier, not only because you can stun lock him, but because getting punched in the face actually makes him visible for a moment. And it's only then, once you take him down, that the secret door in the wall opens to let you through. The strangest part is that Mr. Invisible is the only enemy in the whole game to wield this power, so why would you think to check for him, when the game has never introduced the possibility of invisible enemies and never will again? It's bizarre, I don't get it. Why is it like this? Through the open door is not a whole new section of the ruins, but a single hallway with a single roly-poly and a plinth on which to place the idol that the roly-poly drops. This provides you with the hint for the next puzzle, where you have to arrange a bunch of mini idols around the instant death plate down at the bottom of the stairs. Gee, I sure hope they don't make the hint needlessly obtuse by showing the plinth at a strange angle, or getting the colour of the idols wrong. That would be embarrassing, wouldn't it? Anyway, they made the hint needlessly obtuse by showing the plinth at a strange angle and just getting the colour of the idols wrong. This one here is meant to represent the black idol, but it more closely resembles the white idol. This one at the front could easily be interpreted as the black idol because it's front lit, and all we get to see from the camera angle is the shadow behind it. It's so confusing, and it really doesn't help that the puzzle and its hint are several screens apart, meaning back in the day, you would have to keep running back and forth to check whether or not you've done it correctly, or even if you've written down the hint the right way, which you probably won't have because the game just doesn't understand how colours work. Just putting the idols down in the right spot is a chore because the game provides absolutely no feedback on whether you've done it or not, even if they're placed in the right spot. The only way to know if you've completed the puzzle correctly is to step onto the instant death plate in the middle of the circle, which will still just kill you if you've done it wrong. And even if you do get it right, your reward is to be dropped feet first into a boss fight with a bug. I'm going to save the discussion on combat for a little bit longer, but rest assured that it's pretty shit. It's so shit, in fact, that my friend and I actually had to restart the entire game because we had accidentally soft-locked ourselves into a position where we couldn't actually defeat it. What a great... Needless to say, we were livid at having to start the game again. I don't think we touched it for weeks after coming to that awful realization, but we did, and this time we made sure to come prepared. Oh, I wonder where we're going next. Back to the MIB-HQ. Oh, okay. So that was the Amazon mission, pretty much this game in microcosm, both the best and worst of what it has to offer. We're in the home stretch now, only one more level to go and I can exorcise this demon from my life. Hang on, what was the infection plaguing the town? What happened to the Tentrex Corporation? What were aliens doing at the bottom of an Amazonian mine? Why did we get abducted at the end of the level and how did we end up back at MIB-HQ? I feel like I'm losing my mind. Did we even resolve the problem? What the hell is going on? Mission 3 is set in the Pacific Northwest, on the island estate of billionaire tech magnate Skip Frales. Agent H was sent ahead of you to snoop around, but now he's missing, and Zed is getting worried. This final mission is an off-the-books infiltration into the home of the richest man in the world, to discover what exactly he's hiding on his island. As usual, it's a great setup, but it falls apart pretty much instantly. The final level is one long gauntlet of combat. There is a puzzle or two sprinkled in as a little wilted garnish, but for the most part, all you'll be doing this entire level is fighting endless hordes of the same enemies you've already been battling the entire game, and it is exhausting, which is a real shame, because this is the most inventive the backgrounds get. There's a ton of cool imagery like this giant alien manufacturing plant, and this hallway full of people who have been turned into brain men. This room might be cancer from a mechanical perspective, but visually it's great. It's also the only level in the game that comes anywhere close to evoking the tone and style of both the movie and the comics without it clashing like oil on water. An even bigger wasted opportunity is the fact that the infiltration promised in the opening cutscene is ruined the second you start the level. Don't get me wrong, I do not want to know what stealth mechanics would have looked like in this game because we both know they would have been atrocious. But like with the Amazon level, just imagine if this scenario had been fleshed out to its full potential. Keep the alien factory underground, sure, but allow you to actually infiltrate the mansion above ground too. Have that progression where you go from a sleek and modern but otherwise ordinary billionaire's island retreat staffed by human beings to the alien base hidden underneath. Mission 3 might not be the worst part of the game. The mines still leap right over it to claim that rotten crown, but it is certainly the most difficult. This is mostly because you get a total of 3 save points across the entire level, and the first one is placed so close to the starting area, they may as well not have bothered, while the other 2 are located all the way at the end of the mission before the final boss fights. You basically have no choice but to play the entire level in one go. Not only that, you need need a perfect run if you want to stand any kind of chance against the final bosses. Reach this point without enough ammo or health, and you might as well just restart. There's no reason to bash your head against that brick wall until you cave your skull in. Trust me, I know. Which finally brings me to the combat. Now, Men in Black actually had two pretty decent combat systems to plagiarize. Tomb Raider's combat is definitely the simpler of the two. You can draw your guns with the touch of a button, but Lara Croft actually does all the aiming for you. The way the guns automatically aim at any nearby enemies shifts the challenge of the combat to positioning Lara so that she deals the greatest amount of damage while taking the least amount in return. Which was a great decision because enemies can be small or fast or chaotic, and trying to keep them in your sights would make the game practically unplayable at points. It also means a player isn't forced to excel in two different skill sets to do well at the game. As long as you're good at the jumping, you'll get through the combat heavy sections just fine. The combat even has its own movement mechanics with Lara's iconic flips. Resident Evil's combat is almost the exact opposite. They're both about positioning when you boil it down, but Tomb Raider's combat is all about movement, and in Resident Evil's combat, you can't move at all. Resident Evil also features far more weapons and far less ammunition than Tomb Raider as well. You can't just spray and pray your way through the Spencer Mansion. Every bullet has to count. What weapons you use against which enemy can be just as important as what angle you try to shoot them from. A handful of handgun bullets is usually enough to drop a shuffling zombie, but a close-range upward blast from the shotgun will get the job done faster. Some of Umbrella's stranger creations might be weak to acid or fire. Some of them might not be worth the effort of killing at all. There are enemies that inflict poison if they hit you or have special attacks, or that can only be hit while aiming up or down, and it all comes together to make each encounter a little different depending on your playstyle. It's just as much a part of the puzzle as the locked doors and strange keys, especially when some of the stronger weapons can only be acquired by completing a few of the mansion's tasks on your journey through it. Something common to the combat systems of both games is an incredible amount of enemy variety. The Spencer Mansion has a ton of escaped experiments wandering its halls, some of them unique to one or two rooms, like the bees in the dormitory, or these brundlefly-looking things in the underground lab. Tomb Raider is a globe-trotting adventure set across 3 continents, and each of the areas has an array of unique enemies. Sure, there is some overlap, and like in Resident Evil, there are some reskins to bulk out the enemy roster, but it's still a decent variety. It also includes enemies with ranged attacks like armed men and centaurs, which spice up the combat more and more as the game goes on. Both games have a wealth of bosses too. You want to know what neither of them had? An unarmed melee combat system. You want to know what Men in Black does have? Yep. If I had to describe the combat mechanics in Men in Black with a single word, it would be slow, sluggish, lethargic, torpid. Just about every combat encounter in this game can last up to a minute or longer, and some of them stretch well beyond the point of tedium. If you've watched this far into the video, then you already know. You've been watching Agents J, K, and L waste minutes of my life slapping or kicking their extraterrestrial opponents back into orbit. The animations look realistic enough, I'll give them that, but that is about the extent of the praise I can give. I've already spoken about how bloody hard it is to aim at anything with the guns, given how narrow a window you're given to actually summon the target reticule from the pits of hell, but with the melee combat it's made even harder because the game doesn't even give you that, and the camera angles do not help. If you're fighting up close, sure, most of the time it's a cakewalk, but if you're looking at the world from the surface of Mars, it's impossible to tell what's going on half the time. You just have to hope you're facing the right direction when you finally throw a punch. The target window hasn't changed either, so if the enemy you're fighting is even a little out of range, you're not hitting them. Worse, melee attacks have knockback, so even if you do manage to position yourself in range, you're just going to hit your enemy out of it after 1 or 2 rounds. Your only option then is to get back into range, but the controls are so sluggish that by the time you run back up to the enemy you're fighting, they'll have recovered from the previous hit and will just start wailing on you. They're little shits about it too. They can hit you 3 or 4 times in one go, and you won't be able to do a thing about it because they're so fast. They have range well beyond what any of the player characters are capable of, and each time they land a blow, it resets your stun lock. And that's even before any of them pick up a gun. But wait, there's more. Because their attacks also have knockback, they're just going to hit you out of range again even if you get in close. The only real solution is to take a big turn like an actual tank and get behind them before they can begin the bullying. But even then, that sometimes doesn't work. The best strategy when fighting hand to hand is to get in close, wedge the enemy against part of the background, and keep kicking until they fall over. Which is still going to take forever because melee attacks do a negative amount of damage unless you're fighting other humans, but is still somehow faster than if you pause long enough to let them get a hit in. And God help you if the enemy you're fighting blocks, because they can do that even while they're stun locked. If you're lucky, they'll still take damage, even if it is even less than what they already do. If you're unlucky, they won't take damage at all, which means another round of spin to win until you get into a good enough position to start wailing on them again. To the game's credit, you also have the ability to block, but I never actually used it because the controls are so sluggish that by the time you see an enemy making an attack, they've basically already hit you. You would need to preempt it, and you just can't because none of the enemies telegraph their attacks. It is functionally useless in the heat of combat. Other than the block, each agent gets a kick and 2 punches, and all 4 are mapped to either the arrow keys on the PC or the directional pad on PS1. Up is kick, left and right are the 2 separate punches, and down is the block, which is a neat idea, I guess, but this just isn't a button-mashing fighter kind of title. There are no combos, there are no special moves, you still can't move because when you're not holding down the attack mode button, the arrow keys and D-pad are mapped to the movement controls. By mapping the buttons out this way, you can't aim up or down either, which is an absolute bastard of a decision because most of the enemies are either real small or real tall. And just because you can't aim up or down, didn't stop the developers from placing enemies above or below you either. Something actually praiseworthy about the melee combat is that each of the 3 player characters have unique attacks. J has an uppercut, K has a left hook, and L has a throat jab. L has the most visually interesting attacks out of the 3 with her roundhouse kick and inexplicable nut punch too. They even hold their weapons differently. J is the professionally trained bad apple from the Big Apple, K's a cowboy, and L has no idea what the fuck she's doing. It's a nice bit of visual flair and a nice contrast to how constipated everyone's run cycles are, but it is just a facade hiding some real insidious rot, because while the damage these attacks do is the same across all 3 characters, the time it takes to perform them is not, which very sneakily turns your choice between the 3 characters into the game's difficulty options. Resident Evil did this too. Jill Valentine has less health overall, but to compensate she gets 2 extra item slots, a lockpick, and a very powerful weapon unique to her campaign. Chris Redfield is a bit tankier by contrast, but has fewer starting options without the lockpick and less pocket space. Ironic. This is just in terms of gameplay, of course. In terms of plot, Resident Evil completely changes depending on the character you choose. It's not an entirely different game depending on who you pick, but it's close. In Men in Black, you don't meet different people, you don't go to different areas, you don't fight different enemies. It is effectively the same experience regardless of who you pick. It has to be. Because you don't pick your character at the start of the game, you pick them at the start of each mission, and the developers barely had enough gas in the tank to finish one version of events. It's only the speed of the combat and the handful of conversations that take place throughout the game that really change, which doesn't seem like a lot until you realise just how important speed is when engaging in melee combat. You have to be quick. You need to keep these fuckers stun locked. And nowhere does it tell you this. Not in the game, not in the manual, nowhere. Look at Elle's kick. It has such a big wind up. Most of her attacks do. Even when she's using firearms and not her fists. Which makes sense given she doesn't have professional training like J and K, but as I've since discovered, great verisimilitude often makes for terrible gameplay. Picking L for a mission basically locks you into hard mode. J is more or less the normal option, his kick is the fastest, but his secondary punch is a little slow. But K? Oh, K. Now there's a man who knows what he's doing. Not only the quickest draw in the Wild Wild West, but the guy can swing a punch like the best of them. Picking K is basically picking picking easy mode. There is no reason to ever choose anyone else after you complete New York. So by this point you might be wondering, why bother with melee combat if it's so tedious? Why not just use a gun? Well, here's the thing, you can't. You can't afford to waste a single fucking bullet on anything within melee range once you reach the Amazon, because the bugs that serve as the level bosses from this point on can only be damaged with gunfire, and they are absolute bullet sponges. If you don't have enough ammo to bring them down, you may as well give up. I'm not kidding, they are way too fast and deal way too much damage for melee to be a viable option, even if it did hurt them. But it doesn't, I know, I tested it. So you need to act like the worst kind of miserly player and save everything for the big boss fights and the odd out-of-range camper like MLG Roly-Poly, which not only drags fights out into infinity because you deal so little damage to most enemies with melee attacks, but puts you into position for a potential soft lock anyway if all that brawling uses up too many of the level's healing items. This is why my friend and I had to restart the game when we got to the bug at the end of the Amazon mission. We had used up too much ammo to be able to beat the bug, and didn't have an early enough save file to fix the problem. Silly us, using the weapons the game provided to make all these already eternal tedious fights a little bit shorter. Should have known the boss was just invulnerable to melee damage. I swear to God, the only winning move is not to fucking play. But say you were brave enough to waste a bullet or two, just as a treat to yourself. What's the gunplay like? It's not bad. Oh, sorry, that was a typo. Hang on, let me fix that. It's fucking cancer. I've already gone into detail on how narrow the target window is and how fickle the aiming reticule can be, but that's only just the start. At first glance, the game actually has a pretty decent arsenal of weapons. There's the standard MIB sidearm, the Series 4 deatomizer, the pulsar arm cannon, the pulsar blaster, the reverberating carbonizer, and the iconic noisy cricket and neuralizers, which are all available to pick up in the MIB headquarters. Just looking at them, you can kind of intuit what weapon is meant to be a crazy science fiction comic book equivalent to more conventional weaponry, like a shotgun or a hand cannon, and they're given a lot of character by their descriptions and appearances, but very little of it translates into gameplay, and some of it is a straight up lie. The reverberating carbonizer, for example, is said to have a little bit of brain in it, which makes it unpredictable to use, but in actual gameplay, it just works. Not only that, it's the best weapon in the game's roster, assuming I'm not mixing it up with the Contra gun. I think they might be the same thing, I genuinely can't tell. It can drop every enemy in the game in less than 10 shots. Not that you'd ever find that much ammo for it. Just as well, Poochie has a spare hidden in his meat suit in the Amazon level. The description for the neuralizer states how it only works against human enemies, and that's true, that's a useful hint. But then in the description for the pulsar blaster, it states that it's been deployed against bugs before, implying that they're weak to it, and that's just bullshit. Bring a pulsar blaster to a bug fight, and you can look forward to a swift game over. It's so inconsistent. It doesn't help that most of the guns just look the same when the agents are actually holding them. Long gun, short gun, handgun, pipe. Game takes the shit, you're forced to wipe. There are little things that differentiate them. For example, a couple of the bigger guns are so heavy you can't run while they're equipped, and the noisy cricket does indeed knock you backwards, though to nowhere near the extent it did in the movie. If anything, that little bit of verisimilitude can get in the way of a fight, because it can knock you back into a different screen and right out of a battle, up to and including the final boss. What a great game. But in terms of audio and especially visuals, they're all too similar to really tell them apart. They're just not fun to use, not like Tomb Raider's dual pistols or Resident Evil's heavy weapons, not at all. None of them aside from the standard gun, the neuralizer, and the reverberating carbonizer are worth using. There's a couple of reasons for this. The first is that you can only get these guns from the armory between missions. There is exactly one moment in the entire game when you are offered an agency weapon while in the field, and it is right here in the House of God, prostrating yourself before our Lord and Saviour in the moments before he ascends to heaven for our sins. The only other time in the entire game you can find a gun lying around is in the Arctic, where you can take the shotgun from the trap, but you don't get to keep it since your inventory resets between missions. The second reason is that almost every weapon in the game shares ammunition. The only exceptions are the standard blaster and the Arctic shotgun. It even has its own model and everything. The more I think about this shotgun, the more it feels like a relic from an entirely different game. It's so out of place, like if you found a Roman coin in the Mississippi River. The blaster ammo is pretty common across all 3 main levels. You can get the number of bullets up into the 40s or 50s pretty easily, but the special ammunition is so rare you could probably count the number of times it actually drops on one hand. The pickups only give like 2 or 3 bullets each as well. They're basically no help at all. The third issue, which relates back to the first, is that you can only take one gun from the armory at a time. You get the blaster, you get the neuralizer, and you get one of the special weapons. That's it. If you try to double up, you'll just end up replacing the special weapon you already selected, which basically means you are committing to that weapon for the next mission, and if you're having such a choice forced upon you, you may as well go for the most powerful option. Which brings me to the fourth and final nail in the coffin of Men in Black's gunplay. Every single one of these guns feels like a pea shooter. The only exception is the reverberating carbonizer, which can one-shot most minor enemies. Once I was done playing through the game, I went back to the PC version to test out all the weapons on every enemy type using cheats, just to see what kind of damage they actually did. Each of the guns does a different amount of damage to every enemy, but the differences are negligible, usually only 1 or 2 shots apart. Cheating the game to get every weapon and infinite ammo is all well and good, but in a standard run, if you tried to use the special weapons on standard enemies, you would run out of ammo long before you encountered a boss fight. The worst offender has to be the standard blaster though. It is so weak against so many enemies that it is sometimes genuinely faster to use melee combat than to try and shoot them full of lead. Take the roly-polies. It takes 34 shots from the blaster to drop them, compared to maybe 10 punches and kicks. It doesn't help that they all sound so weak too. The audio effects really don't do them justice, and worst of all, some of the weapon noises are shared between different guns, stripping them of even more personality that they already didn't have. And if you needed any more reason to pick the reverberating carbonizer over every other potato gun in the game, in the Amazon and the final mission you can find just enough special ammo to take out the bugs, giving you a little leeway to use the standard gun for other minor annoyances like the MLG roly-poly and, you know, the final boss. But that's just your side of the combat. What about the enemies? I praised Resident Evil and Tomb Raider for both having a pretty good roster of bad guys to face off against, and you already know where this joke is going. Men in Black doesn't have shit. There are men, greys, crabs, chonkers, roly-polies, blessed worms, bugs, a single dog in the PC version for some reason, the final boss, and a new enemy unique to Mission 3 that I'll get to in a moment. I'll throw Men in Black a bone by saying that each of the enemy types have at least 1 or 2 variants, although some of them just look unfinished, like they didn't have a texture prepared, so just threw on whatever was lying around the office. They all have a unique look to them, but when you get down to it, you fight them all the same way, and aside from the bosses, they fight you the same way too. If they're unarmed, it's a race to stunlock them before they stunlock you, turtle up into defense mode, or dance out of range of your attacks. If they are armed, it's a race to close the distance or draw a bead on them before they just decide the fight is over. They don't pause between shots, the same way they don't pause between punches, and if they can see you, they can hit you. Range is not an issue for these guys. Equally as insidious is the fact that very few of them persist between camera angles. That doesn't mean they despawn or reset, they just stop until you happen to return. So if they were already aiming at you when you left... yeah, so you've got to be quick, but if you fumble a step and lose the game's rhythm, you're going to get ganked. But despite everything I've just said, pretty much every enemy in the game is manageable. They're frustrating to fight, every encounter with them drags on forever, but once you know what you're doing, it's not a matter of if you'll succeed, but when. That all changes in level 3 with the introduction of the game's final regular enemy.
Who's that Pokemon?
It's Pikachu!
Roomba with a gun.
Fuck! These things can go straight to hell. Not only are they small, not only are they fast, but you can be dead before you even know what's going on, because they can just spawn out of the ground right underneath you. You can think you're safe, you can be in the middle of the puzzle, and suddenly wham, Roomba! You know what? Have two. As a treat. Fighting off one of these things is already next to impossible, but if two of them corner you, it's over. Just restart. You are not making it out of that confrontation, and even supposing you did, they'll probably have gone through too many healing items for you to stand a chance against the final bosses anyway. I can't even remember how many times my friend and I had to restart the final mission because of these little shits. They are the one enemy in the game that is an actual challenge to fight in melee, and not in a good way. They're hard to aim at, they're hard to stun lock, and they can dish out so much more damage than they take. Not only are they cruel, they are unfair. Honestly, they feel unfinished. All of level 3 does. It's why I've spoken about it so little since we actually reached it. In essence, it's just one long hallway filled with enemies. I don't think there's a single area where they aren't present. Even the 3 puzzles the mission features are accompanied by enemies, 2 of them being the Roomba from hell. Begone! They're not even good puzzles either. In the first, you have to step on these pressure plates to spin these mirrors in the background, and then press the button in the middle to complete the puzzle once they're in the right position. It's already frustrating if you don't know what to do, because the game doesn't tell you any of that. You just have to walk around the room until you accidentally trigger one of the plates. But adding in the enemies just turns it into an absolute nightmare. The second puzzle is not even really a puzzle. All you have to do is press 2 buttons. One is obviously placed by the exit door, but the other is hidden right by the entrance, and even knowing that it was there, I still couldn't find it while recording footage for this review. It's so well hidden in the background, and they don't do anything to signpost that it's there. Even once you hit both buttons, you have to be standing in exactly the right place in order to open the door. You can't just interact with it from beside the button. It's so obtuse. Back when my friend and I played through the game, we got stuck in this room for at least an hour, because even after we'd resorted to a walkthrough and had completed the puzzle, the game refused to accept we were in the right position to open the door, which led to us undoing the correct solution and wasting even more time. The third puzzle comes right before the final boss, and right after the game's penultimate save point. After dealing with the grey manning the console, you have to get past these instant kill lasers. You can't run through them, you can't jump over them, you can't turn them off at the console. There's no button to deactivate them anywhere in the level. There's no indication of what you're meant to do, which is of course to shoot them, because of course, it's only the room before the 2 final bosses. Why wouldn't you want to waste ammo shooting out lasers on the staircase of doom? What's worse, in my opinion, is that it comes at the end of an absurdly long, absurdly challenging combat gauntlet, which once again means if you used up too much ammo, you're soft-locked. You just can't progress beyond this point. My friend and I couldn't progress beyond this point, and because there was no room on the memory card for more than 1 save slot, it meant we had to restart the entire fucking game again. This was the moment when my friend decided he'd had enough. He'd had his fun, he'd shared the misery of this truly awful game with me, he'd got me to rage at the game's bullshit, he'd got what he wanted. He was content to put the game aside for another few years until he got the itch to try it again. And to be honest, I'd had enough too, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let the game win. I had to beat it. I had to know how this wrecked train of a video game ends. So back to the hallway of existential dread we went, and this time we did it right. We picked the right weapon for every mission. We scrounged every bit of health and every drop of ammo we could find. If we lost too much health in certain sections, we just reloaded. We even sort of got the hang of the combat, and we made it back to the stairway of despair at the cost of our sanity. At the bottom wait the 2 final bosses. All that's left is to defeat them, and the game is at long last over. I've already spoken a bit about the bug, so let's start with him. The bugs are big and imposing, but you don't fight them any differently than the regular enemies. You can't kick or punch them, as I've already mentioned, but in some ways that actually helps, because you can more easily stun lock them with guns, even those with slow fire rates. Thank God the developers didn't have the time to program in weapon reloading. You need a lot of ammo for most of of the guns. The standard blaster takes around 50 shots to down a single bug, and the gun that boasts its efficacy against such creatures takes around 20 for some insane reason. Once again, the reverberating carbonizer wins out with an easy 8 shots. You're going to want something that will kill them quickly too, because the bugs are so fast and so strong, they can kill you in a single hit. They don't even need to close the distance, because like the Greys, they can just send scenes from that awful adaptation of the Dark Tower directly into your mind as psychic damage. It's just more of the same, but harder. The arenas you fight them in do look interesting. This weird chamber beneath the ruins in the Amazon, and this cool sci-fi doujin. This cool sci-fi doujin. No, that is not the word I was trying to say. Strike that from the record. And this cool sci-fi dojo in the final mission. But any spectacle they might have had is ruined by the complete lack of any build-up to either of the fights. You know they're going to appear somewhere. The design from the movie is iconic, and they're mentioned in detail in the manual. It's not like the game was going to leave them out. But up to the point where one actually does appear, their only mention in the game is in the description for that gun. And because the fights usually end so quickly, either at your hands or theirs, you're never given any time to enjoy them. Not that I think there's much to actually enjoy, other than the novelty of battling something from the movie. At least during the rematch at the end of the game, the fight starts off as just another guy in the dojo, who only reveals his true form once you defeat his first phase, which is, I've gotta say, really fucking cool. The final battle of the game is against Skip Frales himself, who is waiting for you in this bizarre trap chamber underneath the dojo. Unlike every other boss fight in the game, this one is actually given a little bit of build-up. It might only be a brief cutscene where Frales has a bit of banter with your agent of choice, but it gives you a good look at the model and actually hypes you up a bit for the fight. Unfortunately, when the boss battle actually starts, it's just more of the same, and even worse, it's broken. It is so unbelievably broken. To start with, over half the game's arsenal just doesn't work on him. Noisy cricket, noisy cricket, pulsar cannon, deatomizer, arm cannon, they don't do shit. It's like the developers knew you wouldn't have any ammo left after the fight with the bug to actually use on this guy, so they just didn't bother to program him to take damage from most of the weapons. The only guns that can actually hurt him are the blessed carbonizer, which takes 12 shots to down him, and the standard blaster, which takes a whopping 101 bullets to end the fight. This is the full amount of standard ammo you can find in the third and final mission. Even if you stock up on carbonizer ammo to deal with the bug, you're still going to arrive at Frales' Transformers cosplay competition around 50 bullets short, which leaves you with no other option but to start kicking, but you can't just bully him like every other enemy in the game, because he recovers too quickly for you to trap him in a stun lock, and he can usually retaliate before you can get safely away from him too. So, how do you beat him? Well, the solution's been hiding in your inventory for practically the entire game. I haven't spoken about the neuralizer up to this point because it's been effectively useless. It barely works on any of the enemies since it only affects humans. And like every special weapon in the game, you only get a handful of charges for it. You can get through the game easily enough without it, in as much as you can get through this game easily. And you'll probably want to, because even when using it against human beings, sometimes it just doesn't work. It still barely works here, but it's the only way to stun Frales once you run out of ammo for your other weapons, so you have no choice but to use it. It only stuns him for a few seconds at a time, and your punches and kicks will knock him out of range unless you get him into a corner or against a wall. He's still fast enough to kill you if the neuralizer wears off before you're ready, but it was the only strategy that my friend and I could find that worked. Get his health to 0 and it's into the skip for Frales. The game is finally over. All that's left to do is enjoy the ending cutscene.
On behalf of the entire department, I want to send a special commendation to all the folks who pitched in and brought about the demise of Mr. Skip Frales and his cronies. Good work, people. You are each instructed to take 48 hours of R&R, which will not be counted against your vacation time. Enjoy the break, everyone. As always, it won't last.
What the hell was that?
Wait, hang on, that's it? What the hell was going on underneath Frales' mansion? Why was he a transformer? Did we win? What was Frales' plan? Was there even an alien invasion going on? What the fuck just happened? Does this game even have a story? Yes, is the answer. It's actually been hiding in the background since the very beginning of the game. Frales is name-dropped long before he becomes relevant to the narrative. In that article for CD Magazine, the plot is actually laid out in a succinct synopsis. Quote, "An alien race is constructing a galaxy-scaled consciousness processor and is trying to turn the human race and its planet into one huge organic macrochip. Their ultimate weapon turns out to be an Amazonian spore-bearing flower, which will neutralize human life into matter suitable for computer processing, and masterminding all of it..." What was that? That was my phone. That gave me a jump scare. And masterminding all of it is Skip Frales, the singularly peculiar, reclusive billionaire computer magnate responsible for the revolutionary, multitasking, revolving PC platform DOORS 95th. His desire to speed up evolution has caused him to sell out his own species on a maniacal whim, end quote, which may have been true at the time of publication, but when compared to the final release that hit store shelves, it's still in some ways wrong. Here's the plot as far as I could tell from everything present in the game itself. Rookie cop James Edwards is recruited by the Men in Black after taking down an alien on a New York rooftop while responding to a mysterious B&E call in the home of L.B. Andrews, a professor of archaeology at Columbia University who specializes in pre-Columbian societies, and is also apparently obsessed with aliens. How is this relevant to the plot? It isn't.
Thought you might want to know.
I guess you could say that he's...
No one of consequence.
As a follow-up job, you're sent to the Arctic to investigate what's become of the crew manning the base there, since they haven't responded for some time. It's probably nothing, a likely technical fault. This is going to be an easy, routine checkup. It isn't, of course. The place is a wreck, the survivors are infected with some kind of virus, and there are aliens running around in the freezing cold. Notes scattered throughout the base reveal that the survivors tried to find a cure for the virus and were apparently successful, but not in time to save themselves. A little investigation reveals a UFO under the ice, and after discovering an MIB agent turned into a brain man, you get a sample of the virus and get the hell out of Dodge before the whole place explodes. Zed explains the virus is unlike anything they've ever encountered, but there's no time to dwell on what the aliens were doing in the Arctic. Something weird is going down in the Amazon rainforest, which brings you to Tentrex's mining town Cara del Diablo. The company has the town on a tight leash, but by checking in with Poochie and Francisco, you learn that the miners have found something under the mountain that has started picking them off one by one. The few who make it back to the surface are found to have been driven mad by whatever they discovered, though it doesn't seem to be the same virus that affected the Arctic Research Station. However, Tentrex cares more about profits than people, and so the mining continues. With no other option, the agents venture into the mine and discover an ancient alien temple, where there waits not only the bug at the source of all the madness and murder, but a garden of strange alien plants that the temple seems focused on growing. The agents defeat the bug, are abducted by aliens, and then just return home, I guess. I don't know. Maybe Poochie saved them in return for freeing him from the prison that is the human body. It turns out the Tentrex Corporation is owned by one Skip Frales, a billionaire techno magnate who likes his privacy, and also claims his mother was an alien. Agent H is sent to investigate, but disappears during the visit. Zed sends the free agents out to unofficially infiltrate Frales' private island, and underneath they find another, much newer temple where aliens are not only manufacturing the strange flowers found in the Amazon, but refining it into the virus observed in the Arctic in order to turn people into brain men. At the center of the temple you find Agent H, but before you can rescue him you fall right into Frales' final trap and confront him, where he reveals that all this chaos has indeed been done in the name of turning humanity into one giant computer.
Don't you see? I've created the most powerful computer in the world. Strike that. The universe. And you're using people to do it.
Why is he turning humanity into one giant computer? Shut up. You kick him a bunch, Frales explodes, you rescue Agent H, you go home, the end. If we look back at the synopsis included in CD Magazine, it looks like Frales' alien benefactors got the chop before the game's release, as well as the explanation that the Amazonian flowers are what is being used to turn people into brain men. I still have no idea how the Arctic mission fits into the overarching plot. Maybe the spaceship was sent to test out the virus on some isolated human beings, and they chose the workers at the research station because it's remote, the lines of communication are slow, and it's not a guarantee that you will survive in such a harsh environment. They just didn't count on the Men in Black already having an interest in the place. I don't know. Out of every aspect of this game, the story feels the least complete, which at this point is saying a lot. It's so fragmented and poorly told that you probably didn't even notice that it's the backstory to The Matrix. I can't believe the Wachowskis ripped off Men in Black, the movie, the game like that. To begin with, most of it is told through these absolutely atrocious pop art cutscenes. On paper, it's a great idea. The series began as a comic book, it's probably cheaper and quicker to animate than full motion video or live action cutscenes. You could get the original artist in to do some work for the game. I have no problem with the concept. But let's be honest, these cutscenes are fuck ugly. The bright colours clash with the tone. They straight up spoil what you're going to encounter in the upcoming missions, and there's very little variation between them depending on which agent you choose. They feel like a cheap and nasty solution that was thrown together last minute so that the missions would have some kind of connective tissue between them, when it became clear to the developers that they weren't going to have the time or money or manpower to achieve their original vision. And there are glimpses of that vision still present in the game. I've spoken about a lot of them already. The Arctic shotgun, so much of the stuff in Cara del Diablo, the way enemies fall off roofs if you kill them close to a ledge, the idol the alien steals from the apartment in New York is actually used to begin the final puzzle in the Amazon mission, but because the inventory resets between missions, you just find it again on this random roly-poly hanging out right in front of the plinth where the idol is needed. The game brings up the owner of the idol, L.B. Andrews, but he never appears, and has no impact on the story. As I've already mentioned, the Amazon level ends with your agent of choice getting abducted. Check out the environment in the background. A huge pre-Columbian city. That definitely didn't make it into the final game. Or consider how you just get dumped back at MIB HQ after getting abducted. It feels like something is missing, like a level got cut, or maybe the missions got rearranged sometime during development. There is more to this story than what actually made it into the final product. There has to be. And the grand shame of it is, if you write it out on paper and fill in all the missing pieces, it's not that bad. As far as survival horror stories go, it's actually pretty decent. The villain's plan is something right out of a Lovecraftian weird tale, something right out of a comic book even. And if it weren't wrapped up in this game, it would actually be pretty chilling. It has potential. The whole game does. The developers were clearly ambitious. They clearly had a lot of interesting ideas on how to interpret Men in Black through the style of early Resident Evil survival horror, but unfortunately for them, and for everyone who ever picked it up, their ambition far outstripped their ability. They bit off more than they could chew and choked to death. In conclusion, Men in Black is still the worst game I've ever played. In fact, looking at its systems and mechanics in close critique has only made me hate it more. Everything about it is broken, mangled by design or by mistake. With enough time, enough money, and the ability to match their ambition, the developers could have created a classic of the survival horror genre, because all the pieces are right there waiting to be put together. As it is, the final product has been well forgotten by this point, and deservedly so. It is a terrible game. It is a terrible adaptation of Men in Black, and it is a terrible Resident Evil clone. It is useful only as an example of how not to make a game, and that's a shame, because some amount of love clearly did go into parts of it. At least some of the backgrounds are getting a second life thanks to the Resident Evil modding community. Needless to say, this is not a title worth searching out to reassess yourself. I'll certainly never touch it again. Especially with how cursed the production of this video has been. Things that have broken during the making of this critique include 2 copies of the game, my PS2, the hard drive on which I was storing half the game footage, my bank account getting the files recovered, a separate hard drive with all the voiceover recordings that I thankfully caught before it shat the bed, both my pairs of headphones on the same day, in the same way, my leg, that is not a joke, and my sanity. I am more than ready to never think about Men in Black the game again. The original Resident Evil and the original Tomb Raider are far more worthy of your time. They may not be as interesting to pick apart, but they are certainly better video games. Men in Black, the movie, the game, may be one of the worst pieces of media ever made. But hey, at least we'll always have Men in Black the song, so here's one last YouTube-friendly sample to play us out. Shit, that was Wild Wild West. And that's it. We finally made it to the end of the video. This one was rough. You don't know how happy I am to be done with it. The Codename 47 video might have taken longer, but man, the technical difficulties on this one sucked. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video and want to support the channel, please drop a like, drop a sub, let me know what you think down in the comments, and spread the video around because YouTube sure as hell won't. It all helps me out a lot and I really appreciate it. Anyway, I'm done. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
What that stand for? Bees.
All agents, please report to briefing room. Repeat, all agents, please report to briefing room.